Well, I screwed that up big time. I ended my own broadcast, and then I hit the countdown timer, and I don't know, it just ended. So I guess we're going for it. If anybody wants to join in, let me put this in the chat. Private chat. Oh, okay, yeah. Rookie mistake. George,
Hi, Tim.
how you doing?
I'm doing okay. I was trying to figure out um, the a dryer problem. So I put it aside and
Oh,
thought that this would be more interesting.
oh yeah. Thank you.
You bet. You bet.
I just made like a bunch of rookie mistakes like consecutively. I started the stream, and then I went to go test it on my phone, and okay, it was going good. So I hit okay, I'm gonna leave, but I hit end broadcast,
Oh,
and there was like 4 or 5 people on there,
oh no. Oh
and
no.
then so they all got kicked off, and now I had to create a new one, and so hopefully they figure out to.
Yeah. What I got was like a timer that was timing down. That was wait. It was saying you could see that I'm signed on. Did
Yes.
that happen?
I didn't see
So
you get on there, but I tried to have the timer on there. That was on the previous one that I ended.
right.
Yeah. So anyway, I screwed all that up. Sorry.
That's okay.
um,
Unfortunately, it happens. So
yeah.
everyone should understand.
So what we're doing here, George, you're new to this um, particular thing. This is a just chatting, and basically anybody can drop in, and it's streaming on YouTube and on a couple of. We'll never forgive you. That's Jacob's refrain.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
so we're streaming on a couple of YouTube channels, and I put the link to join the stream in the comments, so randos can join in. We don't know who's going to join in. It could be anybody,
Uh-huh.
and yeah, makes for an
Okay.
interesting
I
thing. And
bet.
right, I'm hijacking somebody else's time slot right now. Father Eric Seitz is a Roman Catholic priest who normally streams at this time on his channel, and so he wasn't able to do it tonight. So I hopped in, and I'm hijacking it, and
Okay.
so potentially some of his normal people will join in. That'd be cool. So I have no idea who's going to join in and what we're going to talk about. So
Okay.
yeah, that's the situation.
All right. Well, so the takeaway is be flexible.
Yeah,
And
pretty much.
yeah, actually, I was sitting there trying a whole different bunch of things, and none of them were working. And that was on a different subject. And so here I am. Oh,
Good.
looks like someone's.
I
Oh,
just
we will never.
yeah, that's my
Uh,
buddy Jacob. He's
okay. Gotcha.
yeah. So what's new with you?
Well, on a private note, um, the uh, I guess you call him concert producer reached out to me, and we're going to talk again. I've already had an email, a 2-hour talk with him a couple of weeks ago, and now we're going to talk again this Wednesday as far as the progress on this potential brave new world I'm going to enter. So I'm pretty excited about that.
For those who don't know, can you explain what you're doing?
Oh, okay. Who else do we have on?
There's 4 randos watching.
Oh, okay.
Who knows who they are?
Okay.
Be anybody. So be careful what you say.
Well, what's going on is I'm a musician, not, I guess you could say professionally, because the shows that I've done I get paid for. So, but my wife likes to remind me that it's my hobby, and it is sort of something that I did when I was much younger, and then I started my career in IT and kind of put the guitar and performing stuff aside. And then when I was I'm 71 years old now, but when I was around 57, the tribute band craze started happening, or even before that. So I just told myself, and what I've always been told ever since Cat Stevens came out is that I sounded just like him, and it never failed. Everybody would say that, and so fast forward again to this time period about 12 years ago, if my math is correct, I don't know, 13 years ago, I made the decision that if I was ever going to do it, time to do it now. So I put together a band. We're called Magic Cat, with a CK rather than just a C. So I don't get in trouble using a name that Cat actually used for one of his concerts. So it's called Magic Cat, a tribute to Cat Stevens. Had the band relatively successful going in terms of Northern California, Central California. And then our last show was in September of 2019. And it's, then we were, for people that aren't familiar with Sacramento, a large concert venue is the Crest Theater, and we were scheduled to play there in March of 2020. We all know what happened in March of 2020. Everything locked down. So a lot of musicians, including myself, there just wasn't any places that were playing, and I really didn't want to play in small venues and with tip jars and what have you. I had already taken myself through that, so I had pretty much felt that I was happy with what I had accomplished, and I was okay with it. And then early in May of this year, I got in fact, I can have it right in front of me because I go over it all the time. I got an email from a gentleman named Mark Bell, and he owns Mark Bell Presents, and also Wow Productions is another title. And basically, he's a touring show producer, and he's been in the business for 41 years. The good news is not only he, but others that he's involved with have strong Christian ties. Not orthodoxy, but they're strong. In fact, kind of telling you what the show is. The show is labeled 70s Folk Fest, and it consists of 4 musicians that do tributes. So one is a guy named, I can't remember his real name, but he does a John Denver. He looks like him. He sings just like him. But the more interesting thing about him is he's been involved in the archaeological work associated with the Dead Sea Scrolls. And there's pictures of him actually participating in this. He's not the only one. He's just part of a team. So he's got a strong Christian background. Mark reached out to me. He's looking for 3 others. He's got me because I already said, sounds good to me. And I think he's looking for Gordon Lightfoot and Jim Croce. And it's a sweet deal because at this stage of my life, I really couldn't do a tour kind of thing. It would be too grueling for me. But this is set up perfectly. They're weekend tours to where an example would be, and everything's paid for plus a cut at the gate. Every act only plays solo acoustic for a half hour. So there's 4 acts that come out, and I would come in, I would fly in wherever I'm supposed to fly into on a Thursday night, and then get to the room, get everything settled. And then the first show would be Friday night. So there's probably, Friday day, you're going to the venue and doing sound check. And then, so that's one show. You can do up to 3 to 5 shows. The 2 added to the 3 are matinees. If there's sellout crowds and a matinee calls for. But the first show is in one location. Every other venue is no more than 150 to 200 miles away. So get on the bus, travel to the next venue, play the next night. So Friday night, then Saturday night, same thing, drive to another place 150 to 200 miles and play another show on Sunday. And then I fly home either that night late or I come home Monday. And it will start off with no more than 2 shows, 2 tours a month. And it will start off, and I'll cut it right here. It'll start off with a test. I can't remember what he called it, but trial tours. So if I was to make the cut after, let's say, 2 or 3 months, then it would continue on from with me included and the others, and it has the potential to play in all 50 states plus Canada, and if it really takes off, it would be Europe. And I have a card so you can see what I look like when my hair's dyed, which I'm trying to figure out because I really don't want to do that, but I'm trying to find dye that I can wash out after the weekend. So anyways, I'm pretty excited about it. It's a dream from when I was a teenager, and to have it happening when I'm 71 is a pinch me is what I call it. So hopefully I didn't carry that on too long.
No, you summed it up well. And so I've known you for like 15 years.
Yeah.
You're a member of our local church, Orthodox Church here.
Yes.
And you were a parish council president for a number of years.
And treasurer.
Probably
longer as treasurer.
And you've done many of the Magic Hat shows, and you also led our choir ministry at our parish for numerous years.
20 years.
20 years.
From when we were at the business suite. And yes, thank you.
So you're a pillar of the community for sure.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you
very much.
And before St. Anna's, I was actually baptized and was a member of the Sacramento Church, mm-hmm. and sang in the choir there for 17 years under the tutelage and direction of Bill Barbolas, mm-hmm. who is very well known in the Greek Orthodox community, throughout the United States. He since passed on, him and his wife, but I learned a lot. Being someone that came up through a rock and roll kind of, thinking choirs were kind of nerdy and stuff like that. I learned a lot through him, enjoyed it, and then it was just a nice transition when I joined St. Anna's because of circumstances in mm-hmm. terms of location of where I lived at and what have you. So, but thank you.
And you, at various times, I've gotten involved with interesting outreach kind of ministries that I've started or been a part of. And whenever I've talked to you about those things, you've always been excited about those things, and you always wanted to get involved. At different times you were working, you weren't able to get involved at certain times for various reasons, but I always remember you're always excited about those things. And so, it's just your faith is very, to you, your faith is something that you share, that you enjoy sharing with people.
Well, thank you. And especially people like you. I mean, it's, I think, worthy to say St. Anna's is a dream come true, because as a cradle Orthodox in a community, and nothing against, all communities, but it was the ethnicity seemed to be more dominant in the community that I grew up in, which worked for me. But being born in America, my mother was an immigrant. My dad was first generation Greek. My mother, immigrant. She came here in 1947. I mean, it felt comfortable, but I also, went to school with Protestants and Catholics, and we were different. By the time I got in my 20s, there just weren't any other Orthodox. So I would participate in Bible studies at work during lunchtime, and most of them were Protestants and some Catholics and what have you. And I'm the only Orthodox. And the idea is, what was frustrating for me during those years, especially, I went through a period where people didn't know about Orthodoxy, but I needed to find out about, well, what are all the Protestant denominations, but the main ones, so that I can learn where they're coming from. Because they would say, we'd use same words, but they would mean something different. So that's always a thing. I'm more than willing to share what I know to them, so they can see that there's a different view. But the one that really hurt was when I would hear someone say, you know what, I've read, and it would be a Protestant, I've read Alexander Schmemann's books. I love him. I can relate to him, but I won't go to an Orthodox church. And I asked why. And he goes, because it's too ethnic. And it would always be frustrating for me, because that's not the history of our church. Our church history it's in the language of the people. And just to wrap it up, St. Anna's has every kind of American you can have. Color-wise, language-wise, I love the fact that we do the Lord's Prayer, and all the different languages are there. It's beautiful. To me, it's the future of the Orthodox Church in America. And so, but then you bring in people like you, Tim, that I can get excited, because you have as much, if not more, of the interest of learning and sharing. And when I meet somebody like you, I'm going to get excited. So thank you for, bringing me in on this, these talks.
Of course, I thought about you when we started doing this. I knew that this would be something you'd totally be into. But going back to your story about what your current endeavor, your next endeavor, we've been talking about, collaborating in on the music at the church. And I really wanted to involve you with that. And so we started up some chant classes recently, and I asked you to be involved, and you were planning to be, and then you told me about your new opportunity for the new, what do you call it? Tour.
I don't know it. Yeah. I guess if I looked at Cat Stevens Tribute Act for the 70s Folk Fest.
Yeah, your Cat Stevens Tribute Act opportunity. Right. And you told me about it, and I said, and you're like, I might not be able to be involved with the chanting as much, and I said, well, you absolutely need to do this. You
Yeah, I
absolutely need
do.
to take this opportunity. Like,
And I got approval from my wife, which
yeah.
I needed to get first, and then talked with Father Seraphim, because I am one of those that will, um, because I know the music industry is the devil's playground.
Hmm.
And that's why you see so many when they come in at a young age, how quickly they change
Hmm.
when their popularity and then the um, just what's around you. And so temptation is great. I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't the people that are involved in it. Even the Mark Bell is a strong Christian, actually went to Baptist seminary. So we might not be the same faith in terms of our denomination, as a Protestant would call it, but at least it's central. He's been married for 41 years. He um, yeah, so I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't have the knowledge that of who I would be working with. Um,
Hmm.
Otherwise, I probably would have said no.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, we'll see how it goes. As far as the chanting goes, there's also, I'm loving it. There's also the struggle that I have going into this opportunity, and also coming back to the chant stand, is I wear hearing aids. Sometimes they work really good, other times they're irritating.
Hmm.
Um, and the other one is my eyesight. Even though I wear glasses, it's still not perfect. But because I need to do this, I'm going back, and we'll get some. They actually got new hearing aids that are kind of AI
Hmm.
hearing aids, meaning it will take into consideration the environment and the noise level and adjust. I don't have to manually adjust. It will adjust my hearing aids to my surroundings.
Hmm.
And then, always been a problem. In fact, I was noticing in church today, I used to have the candle stand where I would lay my stuff on there and I can,
Hmm.
reference it. I'm going, how is this going to work for me, who really should be kind of in the background? We've talked about that, me next to you, but I'm just trying to figure out the logistics and how that would work with the number of people that we have up there.
Yeah.
Um, and so I've got two challenges ahead of me. I'm excited about both of them.
Hmm.
Hopefully I can do both of them.
Yeah. And also we're in the middle of moving churches. We just built a magnificent building. Um,
Yes,
and but we're not allowed to be in there at the moment.
right.
Um, we had a brief period where we were able to be in there for Pascha, but now we're back in our little box,
Right.
and um, and the sound system is not installed at all in where we're at right now, and it'll be
Right.
completely different, and I have no idea what it's going to be like when we move into the new building. I know that to me I thought it was great with no electrical assistance at all when it came to chanting. I think it was very, it's pretty echoey, and I think that it's probably difficult if you're trying to speak and like give a homily or something in that space without some sort of electrical assistance. But for chanting, I thought it was beautiful as is. I didn't think it needed anything. I don't know what you thought
Oh
about
yeah.
that.
I mean, I remember I told you we converted the garage into um, another room. So it's part office, part sit and watch TV, and part music room. And
Hmm.
I remember before we had anything in here, I'd come out here and play and sing, and the acoustics were fantastic.
Mm.
But there's because there was nothing in it. Once you start putting stuff in, chairs, flooring, what have you, it'll start deadening it, but not to a fault. It will
Hmm.
just not be so echoey.
Hmm.
Um, and I think the couple of times that the few times that I was in the new sanctuary, the closer you were up front, the better it sounded. But if
Oh,
you went
really?
in the back, it was, you couldn't understand what was even being said.
Even chanting, or
Mostly in talking.
yeah, in talking, I
Yeah.
100% agree with you.
Right.
It's very difficult,
Right.
and it looked like it was like the priests were straining to be heard.
Right.
And they were kind of figuring out where they could stand where it was better. It was better if they stood just under the dome, just barely under the rim of the dome. Then their voice was coming down on everybody, and it was
Right.
a bit better, but it was difficult. But I think for chanting, I think it's great. I didn't think it needed
Oh
any.
yeah.
Uh, it, and part of me is kind of like, oh, I just wonder, like, um, will it be better if we turn off the system when it comes to chanting, like, versus walking in being blasted with like electronic noise from the
Right.
speakers?
Right.
I don't know what it's gonna be like. I'm
You
curious.
know what? I'm thinking about St. Anthony's in Arizona. And the chanting is beautiful. Of course, you got some of the best voices
Can you
in the
explain what St.
church.
Anthony's is? Sorry for those who aren't.
Oh, yeah. St. Anthony's is a monastery in the desert of Arizona. And it's been a few years since I've been down there. Yeah, I've only been down there once. No, I beg your pardon. I've been there 2 or 3 times. Um, but the chanting is just beautiful because you have, especially if it's when all of the clergy are visiting also, they've got, I'll give you an example, Father Dino from Elk Grove. His voice is just beautiful. And he's pretty much the lead chanter for all of the priests.
Mm-hmm.
And the acoustics are just fantastic. And I'm trying to think of, you know, um, it's really no different than what we have. They don't have carpeting on the floor, it's tile on the floor. I don't think they use microphones, but I'm not sure on that. I'm not sure on that. But certainly, our church, our new sanctuary, is very similar to the monastery church at St. Anthony's. Is that
Mm-hmm.
does that give enough information?
Yes.
Oh,
I
okay.
just shared the link for the monastery in
Oh,
the
okay.
chat. So if anybody's interested, they could click on that link and check out the monastery. There's a famous, relatively famous guy. What's his name? I think it's called Rouge V, who is
Oh,
a YouTube. He was a YouTuber, and his shtick was, he was like a degenerate guy, and his shtick was picking up women, and so he was a womanizer, and he would, I think, my impression, I don't really know anything directly about it, but what I've heard is that he's oh, hey Lance, come on, join in if you want. He uh excuse me, where was I? So he's like basically had a YouTube channel explaining how to be a good womanizer, basically. And he had a huge following on YouTube.
wow.
And he is, I think, ethnically Armenian. Um, but he's an American guy, but he had
Right.
an Armenian
His,
background. And he really had came to a point in his life where he's just saw the shallowness of his life, his way of life. And he really came to a repentance, basically. He said, I need to do something. I need to turn my life around. And he went to St. Anthony Monastery. And he was there. He was very angry. He talked to some of the monks. He went to some of the services. He was very angry. He was just upset about some of the things that he heard. And I'll try to find he is explaining this, he made a video explaining his experience. So this is where I'm getting the information. And I'll share that here in the chat. But he was, and then Papa Ephraim, who was the abbot, who was very elderly, he was being helped along by some of the monks along a path, and this guy Rushvi, he was just like spinning himself up in his head about how angry he was. And then he saw Papa Ephraim, and he didn't know who this guy was, just as an elderly gentleman being helped along by these two monks. And Papa Ephraim looked at him, And then all of his anger disappeared, and he just felt a peace.
Wow.
And then he went, and the um, Papa Ephraim blessed him, and then went along his way, and that was it. And from that moment on, he didn't have a problem, and so now he's Orthodox now, and
What a wonderful story.
I think he continued on. I think he's still got a YouTube presence, or I'm not sure if he does. He may have set aside all of that, but yeah, I don't know what his current deal is. Maybe somebody else does, and they can inform me. But
Hmm.
I'm going to try to find his Rouge V.
Yeah, my story with the first time that I went down to St. Anthony's, it was actually something organized by Morfula's youngest son, who I know and will always remember him as Angelo,
Hmm.
named after his grandfather.
Mhm.
He became a monk. I mean, as soon as he graduated from high school, he was gone. He went
Mhm.
to Mount Athos, and he's now at St. Anthony's.
Mhm.
But before all of that, and I remember there was something special about him because I remember when he was about 13 years old, uh, Metropolitan Callistus Ware um, was speaking in San Francisco. And I asked Angela's parents at the time that if he could go with me to see Bishop Ware, because Angela, I know, had a strong interest. For a 13-year-old kid, he was locked in for I mean, it was a full day, and it was a British, accent, and the his talking style can be pretty dry. It's the subject that's fantastic.
Mhm.
But anyway, so the rest is history. But prior to becoming a monk, he actually organized a trip from people from St. Anna's to go down to St. Anthony's. But one thing that I learned and was told by parish priests that because I told them I did confession there, a lot of people took confession there. And um, our priest was not happy to hear that because a lot of people um, received a penance anywhere from 1 year to 3 years of not being able to take communion. And the reason why is because the confession was not, you confess what you want to confess. I mean, you still do it, but they came in with a list, though, who I confessed to, a list of every single thing. Like, have you ever followed astrology? Do you drink? I mean, things that, yeah, I've done astrology, but it was all, for fun. It's not something that was, but again, there was enough there I received a 1 year penance and others had 3 years. And when I came home, what's his name? Father Costa,
Cosma.
who's now who's in Modesto now.
Yeah. Father
Yeah,
Cosmas. Yeah.
yeah, Cosmas.
Mhm.
He was not happy because he says the confessions in a monastery are different
Mhm.
than in a lay parish. So just keep that in mind. And I just remind people if they go down there,
And then he let you
um,
off the hook, right?
what's that?
He let you off the hook from your penance, right?
No, he had to honor it.
He had to honor it.
Yeah. It's kind of like the same thing I do. There's the one part in the liturgy, come, let us worship, and uh, Father Doges. So it goes both ways. Father Doges called me up during service because before we went to the chant stand, we're in the back.
Mhm.
Those that were leading the congregation in congregational singing. He stopped and he called me up. He wanted me to go up to him because he wanted to tell me something. He didn't say it out loud, but what he told me is that part, That's not for the congregation to sing.
Mhm.
That's for the priest to sing. And you come in, save us, O Son of God. That's when the congregation comes in. Well, I had mentioned it to Father Chris, and Father Chris wasn't as strict on that. But to honor Father Dogus, even though he's passed on, even though he's not there, I will never sing that
Mhm.
because I say I got it, and I'm honoring him by at least being able to tell him.
Mhm.
I know they're not supposed to do it, but it's out of my control.
Mhm.
Um,
So,
but who's the gentleman?
so this, yeah, allow me to introduce you, George. This is Haris. Haris,
Addis.
this is George.
Nice to meet
Nice,
you, George. Nice to see you,
nice
Tim.
to meet you too.
Yeah,
Haris lives in Cyprus.
yeah.
Is that where you're from?
Yes, yes,
That's where he's
Okay.
at.
Well, I'm looking at. Oh, that's where you're calling from.
Yeah.
Um,
yes.
I'm just looking at the last name.
No,
No,
I know those from Constantinople ancestry have
mhm.
the like. There's a person I'm working with on a project. He's a biologist, and his name is Leonidas Romanos Davranoglu. And
Okay.
I guess that's a typical ending for Greeks that were of Constantinople. And I
Yeah,
don't know. I see it's not glue, but it's
it's not
um,
glue. Glue, it's as you said, it's from Constantinople.
uh,
It's very characteristic as a last, let's say, part of the surname. Nofidu, it's Greek
ah,
Cypriot mostly, and yeah,
what a pleasure to meet you.
yeah, it's truly an honor. I have a good friend of mine, a singer with the same surname with you, sir, and Kyriakos Papaelias. He's from
Ah,
Thessaloniki.
ah.
So, yeah,
Well, I
uh,
always have to say, uh, not something I'm supposed to talk about, but I feel I'm in safe territory. The biologist that I'm working with is has a PhD from Oxford. Um, he he reached out to me on a hobby that, even though I carry the name Papaelias, that's actually when my dad was born with his twin, the mother died giving birth to him. And the mother's maiden name was Papaelias. The
okay.
father's Kolokotronis was a Kolokotronis.
Mhm.
And so when the mother died, my dad's mother died, my grandmother, the father, Harilos Kolokotronis, gave the twins up for adoption. My father went with his maternal uncles,
Okay.
and one of them actually legally um, adopted him and changed his name to Papailias. And
Yes.
but anyways, I'm very much into the study of Y chromosome, especially in association with a storied family. It's not new to.
Oh no.
We've lost him.
We lost George.
I
He'll be
was
back.
about to tell him that also my grandfather name is also Harilaus, was
Ah,
also Harilaus. He died
ah.
some years ago. So how are you?
I'm
How's
well. Thank
That's
God, I'm
good.
well.
That's good.
I so
Okay.
oh sorry, George. There you're back. I didn't know you were where you left off actually. Oh, is
We cannot hear you.
yeah, we got nothing from you, George. Sorry. No audio.
No audio.
You're unmuted. You're unmuted, but we got no audio. If you're on an iPhone, I've had some issues with it. Safari in particular is kind of doesn't play well with StreamYard sometimes, and my iPhone didn't like it. You could try signing out and sign back in, but yeah, nothing. Sorry, we got nothing. But he can hear us probably. So I'll introduce Haris to you, George. So Haris is I mean, I've actually never spoken to you, Haris, but
It's fine.
you joined in on one of the YouTube channels that I listen to a lot, and that's Karen Wong's YouTube channel. And you presented your very interesting theory, mathematical theory. And as I recall, you are not professionally a mathematician, but you have mathematical training, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
And you presented your theory. There was maybe 3-4 videos in which you presented, and it was all above me. I'm not a mathematician. I'm a mechanical engineer. I have some, rudimentary, relatively speaking, mathematical training, but the theoretical mathematics you're talking about is definitely above me, although I try to follow along as best I could. And I found it very interesting. And when I have some more time, I want to sit down and go through those again and really try to follow what you're saying. But it was very interesting. So this is as much as I know about Haris but I'm sure there's much more to the story.
Yeah. That's good enough. So, George, can we hear you now? No, unfortunately, no.
Yeah. Go away, come back. We tried a different device, but
yeah. So that was a very good intro. Actually, I've met 5 times with Karen.
Okay.
She's an excellent host. I really also enjoy her talks. I am still a big fan of her channel, and she hosts all these different subjects. And she's also a wonderful painter. She paints very nice paintings. And regarding the theory, it's a basic theory. It doesn't have a lot of let's say heavy duty mathematics in it. But okay, it's because it moves a bit into group theory. I understand that it's a bit complex, to say the least. So I've actually made a lot of progress since that time. I also got the good opportunity to present it to a very nice, Marx also agrees. I got the chance to also present it to very well-known, let's say, scientist here from Greece, Nikos Lieros. I don't know if you're aware of him. And he goes to me, it's good. So I got I got some great feedback. And
George, can you test your audio real quick? Oh, no, nothing. I'm sorry, George.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Also.
Try a different device, George. If you have a different device, you can try. Computer.
Maybe restart the device.
Yeah. I don't know. My phone did the same thing. When I was using an iPhone, it did the same thing as what's happening to him. Didn't work until I moved to a computer that was not using Safari. So nothing. Okay. Can't hear you. I'm not a lip reader. Sorry, George. So, Kadi, see, that's wonderful. So you had some feedback from a mathematician.
Yeah. I mean, and he's also already publishing a very nice journal. And, because if you are not a mathematician, you need some cover letter for someone to cover you up. So I am computer science by profession. And so it's good to have this, let's say, validation in that sense.
So so you can take my opinion or whatever with a grain of salt because I am not a mathematician.
I am really glad that you said that you've watched that. That's great.
Yeah. So what I kept thinking when I was listening to your theory is you're pointing out patterns. You're pointing out, oh, isn't this interesting? I see a pattern here. There's this, I see these numbers coming up, and you can say something like, I can calculate the speed of light, for example. And I was trying to wrap my head around, what does it mean to calculate the speed of light? It was that you're seeing the number of the speed of light in the patterns that you're bringing up. And, and that's why it made me think of the prime patterns. Well, you are looking at prime patterns. That's what you're doing, right? And it reminded me of that video I saw. It was not 3 Blue 1 Brown. It was actually it was a video by was it the Nottingham University? They do all the math.
Okay.
Is it Nottingham? Yeah, they have
You mean
a
the number file video?
number file. Yes, it was a number file video, and they were showing a spiral pattern. I don't know if it was the same one that I sent, same pattern that I showed you on 3 Blue 1 Brown, but it was a spiral pattern. They said, "Oh, wasn't this wonderful? You see these radial lines, all of these patterns within the primes."
Yeah.
And then they say, "Well, yeah, but then if you look at all the real numbers, they also make these types of patterns, right?" And so I thought, are we seeing patterns that are specific to the primes or to the twin primes? Or are you seeing patterns that are, well, inherent in all numbers? Or I'm not sure. This is what I was wondering. This is where my mind went. And
that's a very good, let's say, thing to ponder. Basically, as I understand it, is when we think about sets, you have all the natural numbers, 1, 2, 3, and whatever, and you also have the set of prime numbers. And there is a very good proof that is called the fundamental theory of arithmetic. That actually says that the prime numbers, they are also infinite. So you can actually put them side by side, and you will see that these two sets can be equal in that way. So you can start, let's say, counting the prime numbers. And George, try.
Hello?
yes.
Yay! When I rebooted,
Oh,
and I noted that I wasn't hooked to my Wi-Fi.
okay. Well, hopefully that solves it permanently.
There is a famous joke in computer science. And that's like whenever you encounter a software problem, what you have to do is like reboot or restart. And there is a joke where a computer scientist had a problem with his car, and he goes on, okay, you just need to stop and get out and open the door.
Well, being from IT, that's always okay. So what do I do? Reboot. That's the first thing that you tell anybody that's having a problem. So it's funny how that works sometimes.
Good.
You were explaining prime numbers, or
Yeah, we're discussing about the patterns found in prime numbers, and I will just to conclude, allow me 30 seconds. What I was saying to Tim is that, of course, the two sets, the prime number sets, they are infinite, so you can actually enumerate them, and you can say the first prime number is number 2, the second prime number is number 3, the third prime number is number 5, and so on till to infinity. But we are not certain, let's say, we don't have a proof that twin prime numbers are infinite. So that's the missing link there. And I personally believe that it doesn't matter. We don't need to answer that crucial question in order to come up with, let's say, that type of theory that I managed to present there. So yeah, that's the short version of it.
And if I can try to summarize what I understand, just a very overarching idea of what I understand your theory is. And George, so Akadi has this theory that he's been working on and is working with a mathematician on, and it has to do with a monster group, which well, I don't even know what that means, but it also has to do with the pattern of twin prime numbers. So a twin prime is when you have, I believe you have two prime numbers that are separated by 2. Is that correct? Okay,
Exactly.
so an example would be 5 and 7 would be a twin prime, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that'd be like the first twin prime, or maybe 2, 3 is.
And we don't count that.
Oh, we
So
don't count that. Okay.
this,
5, 7. Okay, so twin prime numbers, and Khadi says noticed a pattern within the twin primes, in which he's noticing patterns that correspond to all kinds of universal constants, I would say, right?
yeah. So yeah,
Very
that's
interesting.
a good way to explain it, Tim. And
So
yeah.
you must be familiar with Jean-Dominique Warnier,
A bit. Which
right?
part? Yeah.
It wasn't he a French mathematician.
Hmm.
I used to work for a company called Kenor and Associates, and it was when I was in designing and implementing computer programs or systems. And Ken Orr had teamed up with Jean-Dominique Warnier and developed a tool based upon the works of Warnier of set theory.
Set
And
theory.
so that you can design systems using, or instead of writing spaghetti code that's hard to maintain, you're actually adding structure based on set theory. So at the highest, right, if you used a bracket and you labeled what is this system, ABC, consists of, and then so there's a subset within the set. And it can go as far as that you would have, and then it would use the 4 basic logic constructs of sequential, if then else, or do until, and then if then else, and then do while or do until. And I still use it to this day. It's not a tool that's used by the new people, the younger people, but it always worked for me. And that's all. That's the most that a mathematician has ever helped me.
That's great.
Yeah.
You know, some pieces of code they really work. And I was recently discussing with a friend, and telling them that most systems that we believe they are called legacy systems, or
Yeah.
even technologies like floppy disk that most people they consider them obsolete. Actually, the banking system and the NASA and many aerospace organizations, they actually still use them because they are in a way unhackable. So that's the
Well,
they cannot do it off the grid. So what you said about sets, groups, they are very similar to sets.
okay.
And yeah, they are very similar, and they also have like one group, like the master that Tim referenced before. It can also have smaller groups embedded within it. Like the second largest one is called the baby master. So
Okay.
they are like nested in a way. So yeah.
I understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, great. And you are biologist, you said before.
No. So a hobby of mine because of my ancestry. Of course, it's an ancestry that it's hard for people to respond to what I'm doing because they see my last name as Papalius. But as a hobby, from the time I'm a child, just the same as most people do to some degree, is you want to know where you're from.
Yeah.
And so I learned that, and then, but I was actually, what was handed down to me was that we were actually descended directly from Oyeros, Theodoros.
That's great. That's great.
But that's not. I question that. My parents used to always say I analyze things too much, but I would ask just basic questions. Okay, well, if that's true, then from what son? And if you can name the son, from which one of his sons? And then because there's some generations there that needed to be filled. And in 1995, I bought a set of books by Christos Stasinopoulos in Tripoli that he had written. But the first volume is all in Greek. My Greek reading is not very good, but I bought them because the first volume said it was all about the family, not what the one person did in that he's famous for, but where he came from. And so I finally got the first volume translated, and the page 109, I always reference that. It told me everything that I needed to know.
That's a
to
prime
take
number,
off
by
from
the
there,
way.
which is that
A prime number. That's awesome.
What's that?
He said, Honey said it's a prime number.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
After the War for Independence, members of the family, at the advice of Olleros, settled in the village of Ibrahim, which is now the village of Trilafos, which is just outside of Megalopoli. And it used to be the place where the family would come down from Lipovici, way up in the mountains, and come down during the winter months to herd their livestock and what have you. And anyways, there's some more history with that village, but Stassinopoulos writes when he says members of the family settled in that village, and he also mentions and villages nearby, one of them being a village by the Iamoni, which is a church that Kolokotronis had rebuilt when the Turks had destroyed it. And so I'm going to summarize it by saying I found out, a lot of people just know Ancestry.com and 23andMe, and it gives you a guesstimate as to what percentage of your ethnicity is from. But the Y chromosome, the 23rd chromosome, is a fascinating, and I don't know if both of you know this, but it's something that is carried from one male to the next and to the next, starting from the very beginning. So in other words, my Y chromosome, and it's not theoretically, it's just a fact. If my father is my biological father, I carry the same Y chromosome as he. And he carries the same Y chromosome as his father, which would be Harilos, which is carried also by his father all the way back to the beginning. We're talking about, somebody's trying to talk?
Dumb question, George.
Okay.
Then why don't we all have the same Y chromosome?
Well, because there's mutations that happen over time. So if you look at the Y full, there's a thing that you can go out on the internet. It's called Y full. It's actually a Y chromosome tree that starts off, and it's all labeled using alphabetic characters and numbers. So for example, I-M253 is a branch that has more branches, each branch has even more because of mutations over time. And we're talking hundreds of thousands of years. But with modern history, the mutations are easier to line up. And I'll give you an example. The Y chromosome that I am identified with is one of only two indigenous, what is called haplogroups in Europe. Everybody else came from someplace else, but IM253 is one of only two indigenous haplogroups.
Interesting.
The interesting thing is that it consists in some men throughout Europe, with a large percentage being Northern Europe. When I say Northern Europe, probably lower, what is now Germany. But and that's like 45% in Scandinavia. Spain might have 27%.
Interesting.
But in Greece, it's only 2% of the population. So it's kind of an exotic Y chromosome. And understand that IM253 is like 20,000 years old. But through the mutations, where I'm at is what's labeled, and it's like 15 mutations later, is what's called I-BY98669. Well, in my mind, I'm going, okay, if this is what I am, and the story is true of being a descendant of Kolokotronis, at least the clan, then all of the males of that clan would be the same as what I am. So I'm doing this as a hobby. If you're interested, I have a Facebook page called the Kolokotronis Clan and Family Tree. And it started off first as a book project because I wanted to translate these books in English for the diaspora. Was not successful in doing it. I don't have the money to pay for a translator or what have you, but it gave me enough information to go. There was another theory that was given to me, and I took off on it, that even Kolokotronis in his memoirs says right from the beginning, and most people know today, that the original family name was not Kolokotronis. Only one branch took the name Kolokotronis. And that's the branch that all the other family members who still exist to this day, but with a linguistically changed version. How history has it recorded is Serginas, that the first patriarch in Greece proper was, and shared by Oyeros himself, was Triandafilakos Serginas.
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 Okay.
It would be Georginas in America. So, Serginas. And he said in his memoirs, there were still 60 families in Messenia that carried that name. But yet, if you go today, you will not find that name in Messenia at all.
Okay.
So what I wanted to do to prove, and this is where Leonidas comes in, is being that the Kolokotroni are the most storied family in Greece, he's going for his second PhD in history with an emphasis on the Y chromosome. So this whole thing that happened to me here would have never have happened without the internet. He found my work on the Kolokotronis clan and family tree, or Kolokotronis clan, family tree. And he reached out to me and wanted to join forces. And that what we were going to do was we were going to prove that the family name that linguistically was Serginas has changed to Tortsinas. Tortsinas. So one by one, the first Tortsinas, because once I took off on that theory, then I went into my 23andMe, and I found Christina Tortsinas. So I contacted her and I said, "Is your father still alive?" "Yes, he's still alive." "Would he do this? I'm willing to pay for it. We've been trying to get him to do it. I'll let him know the story, make a long one shorter." He was on board, but I asked the question, "Angelo, από ποιο μέρος είσαι?" Karatoulas. The very village that was written by Stasinopoulos, by a village near the village my family is from, by the church.
That's a nice spread. Yeah.
That was amazing.
Yeah.
So then I have found 3 other Tortsinases. They don't know each other at all. The 2 other ones had no clue. The one that I found, Angelo, had a first cousin in Chicago who was a university professor that wrote an article to the newspaper in Megalopoly. He's since passed away, stating that the Tortsinas family was the Tsergineses. And this, the way the story goes, family members either laughed or, yeah, right, or, you know, what do you have to prove that? This is where DNA is so valuable, is because now it's not just on written history or oral history or, you know, census records or whatever. Your DNA is not, your DNA Y chromosome patterns don't change other than mutations. So all of them came out the same as me, IBY 98669. So we've proven that the one line that turned into Kolokotronis was of the Tortsinas family originally. And it was a Paratukla. That's a nickname, Tim,
yeah.
that was given to his grandfather, Yanis. And you probably know the story, but it's a fact. To me, it was, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a mathematician, but I somehow have, Leonidas saw my work, he complimented me. I'm just not a biologist, and he has helped me to move forward on this to where we have done everything that we've got, and beyond a shadow of a doubt, where I will be teaming up with him to write a scientific paper in a reputable journal.
Oh, wow. How cool.
Yeah, that's pretty excited. It's like my wife saying, because most people got tired of my work, you know, but it's just something that was important for me. And it's turned out, my wife just goes, I bet you feel vindicated. And I go, yeah, I do. And you guys, I'm sure, can relate to that. We all have those moments where your ideas or your thoughts are crazy to other people. Why are you spending so much time doing that? But it's huge. And hopefully it'll be something that that other Greeks, ones that have a history behind them. Of course, I always sit there, there's the Albanian problem. I call the Albanian, because many Albanians will say, well, all of those war heroes for Greece, they weren't Greeks. They were Albanians.
Okay.
And that's fine. But you find me someone in Albania that has not IM 253, that's all over Europe, but down to, and the BY 98669 is about as early as 300 AD, but no later than 700 AD is when it was formed.
Okay. Before we go there and down to that route, allow me to just share a few thoughts with you. First
Please.
of all, something that I tried to mention before you were having the issues with the sound. My grandfather was also Harilaos, so that's very nice.
Yeah.
The other thing is that concerning your surname, Papa Elias, what we in both Cyprus and Greece, when we hear someone carrying this type of surname, starting with Papa, it means that they are.
He's a priest.
Yes, he's a priest.
And Arkudorima.
Mhm.
So the Papelias, this is what's fascinating, is that these families all lived in the same areas. So Stasinopoulos, who wrote the 6-volume set, you'll find in census records going back to the 1700s and early 1800s, you'll see the families. So the Kolokotroni were in Lipovici, but Arkudorima, for those that don't know, is just a couple of miles down the road.
Okay.
And the Papiliopouli were from Arkudorima also. So you have Kolokoronai marrying Papaliopoli, marrying Stasinopoli, because you had maybe 15 families or whatever. So you'd marry the offspring. But that was a fascinating thing. Also, is to learn where these families
Great.
came from, and that yes, Elias would be the one that had the name Papaliopoulos. Unless you're going to Crete. I was corrected by a Cretan that says Papalias. I go, okay. But
hey George, let me interrupt you real quick.
yeah,
just
please.
I just say hi to Ted. Actually, Ted and I haven't met, and I'm kind of like
Hey, Ted.
hijacking this time slot, aren't I?
No, you're keeping it alive. So we had a dinner commitment in which guests arrived an hour later than they were supposed to, and so I should have been here an hour ago. Which, look at the live stream, how long you've been live. You have been saving the bacon of the Sunday night open mic night. So thanks.
Yeah, this is the Sunday night open mic night. That's right.
Okay.
That's what we're doing, George. So I invited George, who's a friend of mine. He goes to my church. Actually, I go to his church, and Haris. I don't know. Have you met Haris, Ted?
No. Okay. These are actually all new faces. This is great. Yeah.
So Upcycle Club.
Nice to meet you.
Haris has been lurking in the comments. Upcycle Club.
For quite a long time.
Yeah. So
you've come where people can get after you now.
I figured out I figured out who he was, and I said you need to join in. And so, but I did want to ask earlier. Mark Lefevre said too much of the materialism, and this is while George was talking about the Y chromosome, and I wasn't sure if that had to do with my question or George's comments or what. And I'm curious, Mark, what you mean by that. So elaborate, please. Give me a second.
Yeah.
But. So George is
were you talking about like genetic descent? I was kind of scrolling back through here, and looks like Jacob was talking about how many people are descended from Genghis Khan.
Yes,
and all that stuff.
Yeah, let me read a couple of those comments. Firstly, Jacob said Oglu is Turkish, meaning sun. So that's interesting.
It's interesting that someone. It's too long of a story, but. You're going to have that. That's why when I stopped talking about Albanians, everybody has a theory about, based upon a name or what have you. But the Y chromosome tells all. That doesn't mean that, I mean, when it comes down to it, I think I read years ago that we're all from about 75 families. But we're talking about technically, of course, the Y chromosome testing is you don't want to get the closest. You want to find the ones that are furthest out. And the subject matter usually is a surname project. So this just happened to be a surname that was from the most modern Greece story. Not some, a long time ago, and proving that the surname of Tortinus is today the linguistically changed original name of what we became, at least one branch, the Kolokoronai. And we got like a stepping stone, and I'll end there. So the one Tortinus, our most common, that's called the most recent common ancestor. So when did the man live that this one Tortinus and me share? And it's 500 years ago. And then the other Tortinus is like from 300 years ago is our most recent common ancestor. And then I have one where his name was actually changed to Jotis from Tortinus, and he's a more recent one where we have most recent common ancestor be like a 75 or 100 years ago. So we have like a stepping stone that shows the descendants. This one line comes from here, and when did it enter into Greece. So, or written, we have Oyeros himself saying the patriarch was Tyrannophilaikos Terginas, and the date is 1532. That's what's amazing, is that when we do the Y chromosome, the most recent common ancestor, the first one in, which comes from A480, which is the beginning of this haplogroup in Greece proper, is exactly that time frame. So this is a fascinating story, that the oral history in this one family by this one man amazingly was correct.
George,
That's not always true. Yeah.
George, the other thing I wanted to tell you is that I have listened in the past, let's say, calling this generational tree from Kolokotroneiko. That's how they call it. Like, it's a big family, supposedly. And
Right.
what I wanted to also tell you is that what the question you are trying to answer, it should be very interesting for a lot of people in Greece. So there is on LinkedIn, if you know LinkedIn, it's a business network, let's say professional, and there is one group of 30,000 Greek scientists. So I can invite you there if you want. We can.
Yes.
Yes, and you can ask, you can tell them, and they will help you. A lot of them, they will be interested in what you are doing, and maybe they can provide some additional information.
That would be fantastic. We have found also many that carry the name.
Mhm.
Biologically, they are not Kolokotronia. They carry the name, and there's reasons for that, right? One reason, there were Romeo and Juliet stories even back then. Young lady, a Kolokotronia, meets Romeo. They have an affair. He takes off. She's left with a baby. Aside from how she was probably treated, what name do you think that child was giving? Her family name, Kolokotronis. But the Y chromosome belongs to that guy that she never saw again. So so there's reasons why some people picked up the surname because they fought alongside of him. Some people picked up the name because, I don't know, it made them I have better status. A lot of people, we've learned, also changed their names. They didn't keep the name Kolokotronis, because I tell people he was more like a Trump here in the United States. Politically, when the new government was being formed, he was actually put in prison for 7 months in Naftalion. You probably know that story, because he was against what the government, what he was doing. They killed his son, Pano, his firstborn. But when they started losing ground to the Turks, they let him out of prison and straightened the ship, and the rest is history. But to your point, that's the part. There's many people who have the name Kolokotronis. Either they participated and they ended up not having, biologically they're not, and others refuse. They don't want to know.
I mean, it's interesting. When I was in Chino several weeks ago, I was talking with Jacob, and we were talking about the difference between like the idea of like race versus nations, which is what you get in the Old Testament, and like that. I think you're having the same thing happen with families, where like the modern world is, to Mark's point, the modern world is like, hey, you're part of that family if you're a genetic descendant of those people, whereas the biblical idea of nations is something that you can convert into a family. And like you're telling the story of all sorts of different ways you can end up in a family, right? You can have the bastard son, right? That's one way. You can change the name to become that. You can marry in, and so
you could be adopted.
You can be adopted, right? You can be a male. You can be a boy that's adopted into the family, and then no genetic shared history. To Mark's point about DNA being materialism, I would disagree. DNA is not materialism. DNA is material, and we're holomorphic beings, so we're both matter and form. And so you can't
Oh,
just disregard
interesting.
DNA, but there's all sorts of stuff going on there. I mean, so there's all kinds of crazy stuff like on your last common ancestor stuff. Like if you do the math on it, obviously all this stuff is approximate because you sometimes have weird isolated groups, but like last common ancestor in Europe was like 1500 years ago. It's like not that far back. I mean, the thing about family trees is you're going up and you're doing, 2 to the X, right? Like it goes up really, really fast how many ancestors you have. And there's actually designations for like, there's the last common ancestor, and then there's the generation in which you are related to everyone who has surviving children from that. And so it's not just one person that everyone's related to. It's
Exactly.
Everyone's related to everyone that was around at that time.
Well,
and so
think about it. If I can interject, think about one person, Triantafylacos Tortinus, or Terrianus, 1532. That's when we first hear about him. But was he an only son? Did he have brothers? I'm sure he did. And what happened to them? If we found them, and they truly were, they would show up also. And you're right that the most recent common ancestor for IM-253 is not going to be any further back than 2,000 years ago, 2000 BC.
Yeah, there's just like, it's really amazing. Genetics. There's a guy bumping around. I think Paul Vanderkleem may have played some stuff from him sometime in the last 6 months. He wrote a book distinguishing between what did he say? Basically like ancestry and then genetic heritage and all this interesting stuff about how, like, especially when you get out of the sex chromosomes, you can have all sorts of ancestors that you are in the direct lineage of, in which you share zero genetic material, because that genetic crossing over is not arbitrary. Everyone's like, oh yeah, your chromosomes, they just swap randomly. It's like, well, no, actually they don't. They swap in big chunks, and some places are more likely to swap than others. Right. So you go back 10 generations and you'll have ancestors that you're the direct child of, and you share zero, genetic abnormalities. I mean, obviously, like the vast majority of DNA is the same, but those indicators, right? The indicators, nothing shared, but you're still totally their child. You're their great grandson.
Right, and that's more on the other 22 chromosomes. Like I tell people, the Y chromosome is nothing but the sex chromosome. It determines whether that child, when the sperm mates with, because women have 2 X's, if the winner is a Y chromosome, then it's going to be a boy. If it's an X, then it's going to be a girl, 2 X's. And there's more to that story, but so I call it the taco effect. Yeah, inside the taco, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of people. But the taco shell, you have what's truly a direct line on the paternal side and a mitochondrial on the female side. The difference there is you can't have a surname consistent because it changes. They all take, but on the male side, that's why a lot of them are called surname projects, because it's based upon a surname. Which history shows they change every maybe 300 years or whatever. They're not consistent. But I want to know what was said about the Y chromosome being material.
Mark Lefevre has been saying, he said that DNA or genetics and the modern obsession with it is materialism. And I had a comment on that. And that is that I know all these people who have been doing the 23andMe stuff, including people in my own family. And universally, what has occurred from this is the destruction of the story that we had about who we were every time. And I see it as I'm not saying that what you're doing, George, you're trying to reconstruct a story about this clan. But in terms of like the people that I know who've taken these tests, it's like most of the time they find out, or it tells them that they're not who they thought they were. But it could be completely wrong, right?
But and that's why I'm not as fascinated. I'm not as fascinated with 23andMe and Ancestry. It's a whole different ball game with family tree DNA that looks at just the Y chromosome. It doesn't have to do anything with ethnicity.
what you were saying there is exactly, I think, what Mark was getting at, where you're
Yes.
like, it told them they're not who they thought they were. And you're like, well, what do you mean they are
Right.
and thought they were? Right. And so, I mean,
I
think
found out I'm
what-
Jewish. That was, I mean, this is a huge shock.
Yeah, but then like talk to Jacob about that. Are you Jewish? It's like
I'm not, because it's not from my mother. So
so this is a great point. I've been reviewing this book that I really love by Daniel Toma. He's a Thomistic biologist up in the University of Minnesota, and I really wish I could get him roped into this. He's got one book published, and other than that, he just like writes about fruit fly genetics. Like that's all he does. But then he published what I think is a stellar book on Aristotelian and Thomistic science. But he talks about organisms as fundamentally being as a causal locus. They like bring stuff out to like continue themselves. And when you start thinking about that in terms of genetics, it's really interesting. So you think about like, well, a person is the thing that's produced by DNA. And it's like, that's absolutely not true. If you took 46 human chromosomes and put them in a dish, nothing would happen. Right? Absolutely nothing would happen. They would just eventually break down. It's like what you need that, and you don't just need it in a living cell, right? Because then you can take that, you can fertilize this, you can get the sperm and the egg to fertilize and form a gamete, and then it'll like form, this multicellular glob called a blastula, and then it'll basically stop. And what it is you have to have the start of a human in the right context, which is another human, right? And so it has to be inside of a mother. And so you're never just DNA. You're always a person in the context of a person. And then when you look at, so when I was in high school and college and took developmental bio classes, you get this fascinating thing where you can track this, like they call them like signaling factors, right? So they're proteins that are expressed to up and down regulate all sorts of stuff in the genome. And that starts happening. And you set up your first axis, like forward and backwards on the embryo. And you're like, the front end is expressing a certain protein, and it goes out and it goes across this, forms this gradient, and you're like, oh great, we're going to get some like deterministic action going on. What's that do? Well, it upregulates 7 different things in these groups of cells, and another 15 in these, and another 10 in these, and all of those up and down regulate another 10 things. And when you look, you just get this massive spider web. And then you have all sorts of things down the road where like everything that people are talking about with like epigenetics is where the way that you as an organism are, so your form, the way that you act, so immaterial qualities of you, say your mind, are affecting the internal environment of your body, which is affecting the regulation of your DNA. So it's not just bottom up. And so what you see with DNA is it's something much more like sort of the base limit of what you can do, right? If you don't have the genes to produce regular hemoglobin, say you have sickle cell anemia, you're going to have sickle cell anemia, right? Like your body's just going to produce that stuff. But everything within that limits, there's all sorts of other stuff in terms of what you're like, how well your body uses stuff, if it regulates things up and down. At any rate, all that to say, it's totally wrong to see it bottom up. You're a causal locus. Internet's cutting out. You're a causal locus that's like going out in the environment and bringing stuff into you to maintain your form, your material form, your substantial form in the world. So I'm totally on board with Mark. I think you can see families in the same way, where families use genetic lineages to persist in the world, but that's not what families are by any means.
No, they're not. That's why I would say if you don't have the biological, the same Y DNA, it doesn't mean. I have a brother-in-law who was adopted into my wife's family. The last name is Jimerson. Is he a Jimerson? Yes, he's part of the family. He was raised in the family. But 300 years from now, if someone or 200 that's doing a study on the Jimerson family, his DNA would not match the ones that are biologically part of that family.
Yeah. And this is, this is interesting. When I was in grad school, this is what this whole problem of defining families is kind of the same problem as defining species.
Right.
And so we had this whole thing of, well, the older idea was if you have species that a population that can interbreed and produce viable offspring, then you're good to go. But then you're like, what about bacteria? It's like, oh crap. Bacteria reproduce asexually. Not only do they reproduce asexually, they will actually swap DNA with each other, or RNA, excuse me. Most bacteria are RNA, but they'll like swap pieces of, it's not sex. They're not producing new bacteria. They're just swapping genetic material with each other. And so you're like, well, what's a bacteria species? It's like, well, this is the part where like biology in particular is like really going to have a reckoning here, because if it's all bottom up, if it's all, well, it's just genetics, it's like, then every single bacteria is an individual species. It's like, how's that helpful?
Yeah, right. Yeah, good point.
My,
Good point.
my sister-in-law, she was like really into the 23andMe thing, and she was telling us all of the stuff, and I don't even remember what she said, but it was debunking all these things that we knew about her, well, my wife's family. So, and she's like, why don't you guys do it? And my wife and I were both like, no, we're not going to do it. She's like, why not? And my wife didn't answer, but I said what I said earlier. It's like, well, why would I want, like, what is it going to tell me? It seems that its only function is to debunk or to destroy,
True.
to destroy narratives.
No, Tim, I will tell you what it's for. It's so that the Mormons can figure out who you're related to and seal your soul in a Mormon ceremony. I'm not kidding. 23andMe is owned by the Mormons. It's like, that's what it's for. It's so they can reconstruct phylogenies of humans, so they know who to bring in to baptize the dead.
But right.
Yeah,
And that's the other side of it is the sharing of my data, of my genetic data. And I just said, I just have a bad feeling about it. I just don't like it. That's basic. And she looked at me and she's like, she looked at me like, what are you talking about? Like this is science. It's just good. There's just nothing could possibly go wrong with anything that's based in science. So,
So have any of y'all listened to the Universal History podcast that Richard Rowland and Jonathan Peugeot have been putting out?
Yeah.
Those are a great sort of counterbalance to it. It's like, right, who are you? It's like, well, the old project was we are who we are based on how we came out of the Table of Nations and how we came out of Troy. It's like, those are the two things. It's like, George, how did your family come from Troy? It's like, that's the question.
Right.
Can you trace it back? Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, one of the things that there is one scientific field basically called computational biology. So what they are trying to do is to identify variation in genetic sequences. So maybe that has to do with all these phylogenies and the clans and also the diseases, let's say, that maybe sometimes they come hand in hand with these phylogenies and the heritage and everything else. So yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. What you're talking about computational biology? What kind of life are you? What organisms are you looking at?
No. It was. I just remember that I was looking into it from. It was one of the courses that we had in computer science. So it was one of the specialization courses, and we were looking into something called SNPs, SNPs basically that.
Yeah.
To identify
single nucleotide. SNPs.
SNPs, yeah.
It's those little quirks. I mean, it's interesting. Like, even every child is genetically distinct from their parents too. There's also genetics.
Overall,
Even think about it's called genetic material for a reason, right? It's not your genetic form. It's your genetic material. Like, it's what you can pull from. Like, I think that if you start thinking about it from any other way than as material, like in the Aristotelian sense of material, you could just start to get into all kinds of trouble. And it's really helpful for looking at stuff, but like, it's the thing that organisms draw from.
Yeah, what's come out of, and again, I'm not a big fan of Ancestry or 23andMe. The only way that it's helped me is if I'm looking for names that are associated with the family based upon written history, that some of them actually change their names for whatever reason. And I'll find them and then I'll message them and see if they're interested in participating, if they're a male, in the family tree DNA, because it's not going to tell you anything other than what is your haplogroup for who you are. Nothing else. It's not going to guess your ethnicity. It's not, because, like I said, at the highest level, it exists all over Europe. But it's as you get over time and things start breaking down, you can now find the specific part of where you're a direct on the paternal side from.
Yeah.
The interesting part is all of the other theories. So some try to go, well, since it's a haplogroup that formed in Northern Europe, perhaps they are the families from the Varangian Guards that actually came from Western Russia and even the Scandinavian countries. And they were the guards for the Byzantine emperors. And it was a generational professional. So the son of a Varangian guard became a Varangian guard. And then in 1453, when Constantinople fell, the theory is everybody split, that we're able to split, and that, one line came into Greece, and that's where I'm from. Others talk about the Visigoths and what have you. Leonidas, the guy that I'm working with, I did want to share with you. What's the science that has to do with bugs and reptiles and
Entomology and herpetology.
Yeah. Okay, so he's in Papua right now. It's his second trip, because Papua actually, I think, as I understand it, my brain is not there, has 80% of all the different insects that exist in the whole world. So they go there to get samples and do studies, and he's actually got a book that he co-authored out of Oxford on that. So he's really, as my wife goes, she just goes, he studies bugs. Most women don't like bugs. So, but it's, all science is fascinating.
But your point about like you finding these stories through the genetics about like these guards coming down and having children who continue to be in that, like, that's great. Like I think that's how we should be looking at that, because you're not saying, well, we found out who people are because of their genetic lineage.
Right.
What you're doing is it's like, it is in this, okay. I mean, like, it's kind of like animal history. Yes. So it's like, okay, so a while back, I watched this series by a guy, I wish I could remember his name, but he's a forest ecologist up in New England, Dan Wetzel, last name of Wetzel, I think. He's got 5 or 6 of these lectures up on YouTube, and he walks out in the woods and he says the most insane stuff. He'll go like, this lump of ground right here is where a tree fell over between 7 p.m. and 9 p.m. on December 13th, 1894. And you're like, okay, what is going on here? And he walks back through how he knows that the tree fell in this direction because of the movement of the earth, right? And so he's like, a tree fell this way, and you can tell based on the little bit of wood that's left there, like it was like a hemlock or a chestnut or something that took a long time to rot. And based on the size, it probably fell in this year. And then if you go back and you look at the historical records, you can find when the eye of a hurricane moved over this spot in this particular time on that day.
That's a great example. And
so it's that interaction where you're like, there's the material. Absolutely. He went out and found the stuff on the ground. Here it is, a pile of dirt. But then it's interfacing with the story in a way in which they're like feeding each other. It's not like the dirt says, this is truth. Nothing else is true besides this pile of dirt. But it's like showing you where to look.
Right. So we combine census records, Ottoman census records, and what they wrote down as far as who lived in these villages, like as old as 1500s, along with the oral and the written, along with the genetic and what have you. And, I kind of liken what you were saying. I started thinking of the rings on a tree. That the Y chromosome in this particular discussion is like the rings in the tree, that you can actually trace how old this tree is by those rings, and then carry on to with the stories that you just shared. So yeah, it by itself is not as interesting as it in the context of history and learning about the various possibilities, which just raises more questions, which is what is my love? A lot of people like jigsaw puzzles. This is all a puzzle, and that I thrive on it, because you open up one door, you see 3 more doors, and you open up 2 more and there's nothing, but you open up that 3rd one and oh boy, you keep on going. That's what makes it fascinating, at least to me. Is it's a never-ending story. And
hey Emma. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Hi,
I was
Emma.
just hi. Hey, I understand that you did a conversation with Paul. I was curious.
I
what you thought
did.
of that.
It was good. I felt bad because I realized afterwards that I kept like getting halfway through a thought and then pivoting to something completely different in the middle and never actually like finishing the thought. So I don't know what watching it is going to be like, but it was really fun to do. And I've been like obsessively stalking the comments on the little teaser clip he put out.
Yes, the picture of you goes up in the world and you're like, what do people think of me? I need to know what people think of me.
Pretty much, yeah.
That's amazing. Did you have anything that you were you just coming to hang out and
I was
be
mostly
part of
just
things?
coming to hang out. Curious about, what was going on tonight. I always like the Sunday night open mic, so.
Yes,
So
Miss
Elma,
Frederick.
we kind of hijacked it as Greek Orthodox guys at the beginning, because it was Ted and Father Eric were predisposed, and we saw our opening and we jumped in and we took over. So
This is how it always happens.
Yeah.
Gotta watch
was
out
trying
for
to-
you, I guess.
I had something I wanted to kind of raise for discussion. It came out of a conversation out of the friend this week that was really interesting. So we were talking about he was in a situation in which he was extending mercy to someone in his life, and there were other people around him that did not think he should extend that mercy. And we're talking through the repercussions in his life and like what that means about how these things always extend out. And one of the things that struck me is that by him extending mercy, he was actually bringing judgment on these other people who say didn't want to act mercifully. And I was thinking, and then I immediately thought of our Lord when he in the interaction with a woman caught in adultery. And we always think about that in terms of the mercy that he's extending towards her. But that mercy comes at the same time as he is actually holding everyone else in the situation in judgment. And so I've just been mulling over this weird thing. It seems like almost every time that, like, when somehow mercy and judgment are intertwined in a way that I'd never seen before this. And I was curious if there's any thought on that, if any of y'all had any insight on kind of untangling that problem.
Ted, can you give some context? Where did this come from?
This is just out of a conversation in my life with a friend, and I'm not going to share any more detail on it because that's the way it is. So I was okay. Well, okay. So another maybe I can give a more concrete example. Another one. Okay, it just kind of that story actually is to the Bible. For instance, when like my child, it's just interesting that, hey, Mark, welcome.
Look what the cat dragged in.
Yeah. In my own life, when so like with my children, if my child does something wrong and I say like, I forgive you for that, right? Like I extend mercy towards them over that thing. There's I'm simultaneously acknowledging and letting them know that they did something wrong. Does that make sense? Like when they're just doing something right, I'm not extending mercy towards them. There's this weird thing in which like anytime mercy like enters the world, it's always at the same time like judgment is happening somewhere. Because if you're having mercy on someone, it's because they're in a place of judgment. And when people extend mercy, it like brings or I was thinking, I don't know. I don't know if anyone can help me untangle that.
This is easy. Look at my live streams, right? It's discernment, judgment, action, in that order for a reason. And so, and I define action as something independent of you, right? Outside in the world. Like if you do something and nobody else can validate it, it's not an action, right? That's just how I define action. But what that means is that if you do something in the world, take an action like extending mercy, say publicly, where people can witness it, then it is a judgment, because the judgment had to precede the action, and that just resolves it. And if you do it privately, that's a whole different. Now we're back into the religious spiritual frame, but the action being independent of you or observable by an independent party that's not you, right? Then that is a judgment, because that action is the result of a judgment, and that judgment is the result of a discernment.
So is it something like what your comment earlier in the comment section about how like there's an infinite number of things that are true and most of them are unimportant?
Yes.
Like you're suggesting that extending mercy it's magnifying the fact that anytime you're paying attention to something, you're judging everything else not worth paying attention to, basically.
Yep. That's also true.
That's
right.
interesting.
That's Vervaeke.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's
that
a very Vervaekean way of looking at that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a fan of that way of looking at it, for sure.
To be able to zero in.
Emma, what were you going to say?
Oh, sorry. I think you can really tell also how much our culture doesn't like this, because what do people tend to say when you say, I'm sorry?
Oh, it's okay.
They don't usually say, I forgive you. They say, it's fine. It's no problem. Don't worry about it.
Right.
Oh,
They tell you
interesting.
not
Yeah.
to judge your action as something worth apologizing for. They don't say,
Right.
like, yes, you did something wrong. You have wronged me, and I forgive you.
That's
they
a good,
say
that's a
it's
good
not a
catch,
problem.
Emma. That's a really good catch.
I
We're
gotta chew on that.
discounting.
Yeah,
Well, and
yeah.
I make the case the other way, right? Oh, don't judge. We're discounting judgment. But what that does to you, and I talked about this in my stream on judgment in particular, what that does to you is it destroys your discernment, because you're trying to break the connection between judgment, action, and discernment. And when you convince yourself, oh no, I'm not judging. I'm taking action in the world, but I'm not judging, which I would argue is impossible. What happens is you lose discernment because you're not paying attention to the fact that you're discerning things. And so then you can't make good judgments anymore because you have no discernment. And then you end up not knowing, and say, as a conservative Republican churchgoer, right, that drag queen story hour is bad because you've lost discernment. Like it's a 2-second thing. Like, boom, this is definitely not good. Like it's not
also
hard, right?
not that you're not judging anymore. It's just that the only kind of judging you do is the snap unconscious kind.
Which, I mean, that is so much of it. I think if you want to drill into this, I'm immediately thinking there's all sorts of different like levels of judgment, right? One is like the Vervaekean, what should I pay attention to? Which does not necessarily mean something is good, right? So paying attention to something is not the same as judging something is good. Because like I pay attention to snakes doesn't mean I think that snakes are good.
Yeah, that wouldn't be judgment in Vervaeke. That would be relevance realization.
Yeah.
That's his black box.
What's the difference between judgment and
fair enough.
relevance
It's a
realization?
black box for us. Like we're like, oh, Dragon of the Apocalypse. We're just gonna say that's a black box and like back away slowly and just say it's definitely there. We don't know what it is, and we're gonna build everything around it. We definitely have done that because it's.
Can you explain the difference?
scary.
Like all this time I thought we were talking about relevance realization. What's
No.
the difference?
Our
Discernment and relevance realization.
relevance realization is a filter on discernment, right? Because what you have is you have the salience landscape, which we'll say for Vervaeke is almost certainly the objective material reality, which I argue doesn't actually exist. But you have a salience landscape, things you could be aware of. Then you have your field of awareness, which is less than all the things you could be aware of. And then you have your attention, and then you have your focus. And when you think of it that way, now all of a sudden, a bunch of things make sense. Like having these proper abstraction layers in your models is fantastically important. Like it's absolutely everything.
So
and because we're being so postmodern, we don't pay attention to that orientation of where are abstraction layers, what are the frames actually doing, and are they serving us? Right. So if you try to understand the world from a political frame, you get 2 buckets, and it ain't going to work because you have a binary picture of the world, and the world's not binary, and it's just never going to work. You can get close for some things, right? Because grayscale, but you're not going to reproduce 7 million colors. Like that's not going to happen.
So
Tim, what have you got?
relevance realization is like, then it's like being able to determine what matters. So people can't figure out how to categorize things anymore. They can't categorize people into genders, for example. There's the relevance realization tells us what are the factors that matter in terms of categorizing people into gender, for example.
It might.
And then
I
discernment.
I think you have a deep intuitional point there, Tim. But again, I don't even touch relevance realization. I mean, we
Okay.
talk about it. We say it's definitely there. It's definitely a thing. We're not going to define it. Let's move to something we know about, right? And then
Okay.
I've got the knowledge engine model, right? Like let's focus on these things because they're easy. Let's not
Right.
focus, but also look. At some point, it breaks down, right? At some point, the materialism fails. And if Vervaeke, and he did talk about this, Peterson talks about relevance realization too. He just didn't use that term. If that's the black books they want to use, and again, I'm using it too, like we're all using it at this point, that's fine. But that's the Izok gap. That's the difference between where materialism fails. That's the end of materialism is relevance realization, right? And then you flip into that emanation, that spiritual or ethereal side. That's definitely what that is.
What's interesting is like Owen Barfield, if any of you are familiar with him, was writing about this stuff back in like the 60s. So he's got a book called Saving the Appearances, which is not like a book that I would necessarily recommend, but the frame that he puts in, he was an anthroposophist, right? So he was a follower of Rudolf Steiner and had a long-standing friendship with the Inklings, with the rest of the Inklings. So, but he sets up the world as original participation and then moving into a culture of what he calls idolatry and then final participation. And original participation is essentially unconscious relevance realization. So you're like in the world and you don't distinguish that you're not aware that you're distinguishing between things, and you're not aware that you're categorizing things. Yeah, Sherry's in the comments says she's familiar with Owen Barfield. I better be careful. So I'm going to do my best. Then what we call like materialism or modernist materialism or any of this, it is this world where we start to think that the things that we see are just those things, right? That we're not doing that sort of winnowing down process. We're not paying attention to some things and not other things. And then he argues that the only way to get out of that is what he calls final participation, which is a conscious awareness of that process and a cultivation of it in essentially wisdom with the help of the logos, the divine logos. It's really, I mean, it maps on pretty much dead on, especially like if you look, like a lot of the stuff they were talking about at Chino was we have to, there's these things are forced on us because we're aware of them now. And so you can't just do them unconsciously anymore. And
that's nonsense. People do it all the time. Like literally around you, people do it all the time. But Owen Barfield describes OMR, objective material reality. That's what that is. It's just the material. It's there.
No, that's not at all what he said. Well, he's very clear that he's very clear that your consciousness is involved in your perception of things. And so like one of the things he talks about is like things like rainbows. I mean, his famous examples of a rainbow, like a rainbow is not a material thing. It's a rainbow is what a conscious perceiver perceives given a certain material arrangement. But the rainbow is neither in the mind of the perceiver, nor is it the arrangement of material things.
Right.
So
right.
He says one way is
wrong,
to just
Ted. But
what's wrong?
The idea that our perception is mediated by our consciousness is wrong. Our conscious perception is mediated by our consciousness, and our unconscious perception we know nothing about, which is the difference, right? And it's our unconscious.
I mean, that's definitional.
But that's a big difference. Like that's a huge whopping difference because what people don't want is they don't want the quote unconscious. And oh, by the way, as we learned at Thunder Bay, because I was at Thunder Bay, that was nice. Nobody has a definition of consciousness. Doesn't exist. And all attempts to define it through material measurement have failed. Mandral was clear about that in his talk. He was like, oh yeah, this guy had this whole thing about measuring brainwave, and it failed so miserably. It's a stunning story of a miracle, effectively, is what it ends up being. But that's the problem with these things. the materialism ends at some point, and consciousness is trying to bridge the Azot gap. That's why they invoke it, but they invoke it without without acknowledging there's still an unconscious. Even if you solve the conscious problem tomorrow, you still have to deal with the unconscious, and that's not just a psychological thing at that point, because consciousness, they're extending it into cog-sci, they're extending it into physics, they're extending it into quantum physics, they're extending it into past psychology.
I mean, this,
it's crazy.
I don't think that's that. Well, okay. So what's funny is, like, I actually don't think it's that worrisome that people are like, oh, we need to extend cog-sci into all these things, because, so again, to go back to Daniel Toma, he talks about science being based on common human experience. So all science that's ever done is done based on common human judgments of reality and things that we know are true without ever being taught, like the rule of non-contradiction, cause and effect. Those are things that like you can't prove. No one teaches you. You just know them about reality. And everything that science experiments do is they try to bring things that we can't understand or see to the realm where we can see them and make judgments about things. And so when people they're like, oh my goodness, we need to get cog-sci involved in physics. It's like, because you've realized that like the human mind is involved in physics. It's like, okay, great. That's like the way that it's always been. So his example Toma's example that I love, and is, he says, like, science says that, physics says that red light is light that has a wavelength of 570 nanometers or whatever it is. It's somewhere in there, 870 nanometers. I don't know. At any rate,
Right.
what he said is, you can only know that because you already know what red light is. Like, you already have to know what red light is before you can know what wavelength it is, because how else could you judge
it? Right. That's the Peterson conversation.
It's not exactly framing. He's talking about actual just knowledge of the world. Like, we have knowledge of the world that allows us to then do science, not the other way around.
Right. Science creates information. Knowledge pre-exists, because you can't form the signal without the frame. Right. So yeah, that's this is the Vervaeke-Peterson conversation that they did with Pageau, where it's basically Peterson's pointing out science is embedded in something. And the thing that it's embedded in is, roughly speaking, religion. And you can't actually get around that. Like, science doesn't have a telos. So there's no way around having all of this other framework in place before you can even try to do science.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I wanted to go back really quick. Sherry's asked why I wouldn't recommend Owen Barfield's book, and I wanted to clarify. It's a book that I wouldn't necessarily recommend. I just think it's like a really tough book, and so I wouldn't just be like, go read it, because it's like really, really convincing. But I'm not sure that I would just tell everyone to go and read it, because I think that there are there's some subtleties that are wrong. So that's all. I just wanted to say that for Saving the Appearances, there's some fabulous insights in me. It's in it for me. It's been really. I've read it a couple times since college.
Have you encountered Saving the Appearances by Pierre Duham?
No, I didn't know there was another. Well, so that quote is according to Barfield, and I'm assuming this is why is from like Old Astronomy, right?
Yes.
Old Astronomy was not telling you the ontological reality of the heavens, but it was the mathematical approximation that saved the appearances.
Saving the Appearances. Sozin ta Phenomena.
Okay. Who is this by?
Pierre Duhem. Duhem. It was recommended by Wolfgang Smith.
Oh, that you got my interest.
Yeah.
It's a good book. It's very interesting.
Character.
It goes through the history of astronomy from starting with ancient Greeks, Ptolemy and Ptolemaic astronomy, which was basically the totality of astronomy for millennia, and how there was the shift near the time of the Renaissance, and the shift was that the astronomical models are models, and they're not. We can't know anything really about the essence of anything beyond the moon. We can only know anything in essence about what's below the moon, sublunar. Beyond the moon, we can't really know anything essential. And but we have this model that works really well. And Copernicus came up, there's the heliocentric model, which was a simpler way, actually a very simple and elegant way to calculate the positions of the planets over time. And so, okay, that's great. It saves the phenomena. It's okay. It's a good model. But the shift happened around that period of time, and in particular with Galileo, was the idea that not only must the model work, it actually has to correspond to the internal essence of what's actually up there. And that was a shift in thinking, and they rejected the idea of saving the phenomena. It actually, because the theories that came about as a result of that were worse. The models were actually worse, but they were considered to be in vogue because they presumed to know something about the essence of what was happening in the stars. And later on, the models become more accurate, but still they're not as elegant or as easy to, not as good for, not as elegant for calculating the positions of the planets. But they're very, very complex models based on general relativity and gravity and all of this stuff. And then there's the presumption that actually corresponds to what's really happening. And and
that's Barfield's definition of idolatry, by the way, that the models actually correspond to reality. And Sherry was bringing up in the comments that a study in idolatry is the subtitle of the book, and it's that idea that yeah, exactly, that appearances disclose essences, which is
that's the map for the territory problem. It's all the same problem. Like, everybody's using different terms, but really it's the same as map for territory. A model is a map, right? It's a three-dimensional map with time component.
Well, but Mark, there's some more subtlety to it there. Particularly, what was going on was that, because that map should include the possibility of, say, internal essence or whatever essential essence of things. But what everyone was saying before that was, if you look up at the stars, you make mathematical models, you can't get behind that. You're not getting behind the appearances at all.
Right.
And then the Copernican shift was, hey, if you get a good enough model, you can get behind those things. You can get at that essence. That's fundamentally the shift. And it's like, where are you gonna get? How are you gonna get behind things? Is one way to say it. How are you gonna see behind things?
Right, but when you do that, it is idolatry, right? You're trying to look past the thing to the smaller thing instead of looking past the thing to the larger thing. There's that reciprocal opening versus reciprocal narrowing again. That's the difference between an icon and an idol.
I'd have to think about that.
Well, look, I mean, just take a map, right, and say, all right, is it a topographical map? Because that's one kind of map, right? That gets at a certain aspect of an essence, you could say, right? Or, each type of map, if it's accurate and precise, gets at a different aspect of the essence, right? But when you say, no, I have access to the full essence through this map or this model, that's idolatry, because the thing on the other side has to be bigger, not smaller. And so you can't say, well, I'm going to constrict my interaction with something to this and then expand it out on the other side, because that doesn't make any sense.
Hey, real quick,
Okay,
sorry to
I just
a real quick housekeeping thing, Ted. I need to take off. Are you going to be able to continue the stream and end it?
Me too.
let me.
Bye, Cadiz.
How
So
do I?
it was
Let
nice.
me see if I can figure out how to do this.
I can take it. Not a problem, too.
Bye, everyone.
Mark.
Okay.
Yeah,
Bye,
I mean,
Cadiz.
See you, Hadis.
I'm going to hang
Good to
around,
meet you, sir.
but I actually don't
too.
know how to make it so that I'm continuing to.
No, it's
I'm pretty
automatic.
sure
It's automatic.
even if
Oh,
everybody
okay.
just leaves, it'll shut off after a couple minutes.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
correct, Emma.
Okay, so I can
Oh,
take off.
Sit around.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
But who lets new people on? That's the question.
That's a good question. Yeah.
I can let new people on. That's not a problem.
Okay.
Mark's got that.
Thank you,
Okay,
Mark.
Great.
Thank
Sorry,
you,
I
Mark.
couldn't stay longer. I would
That's all right.
enjoyed to continue the
Thanks.
conversation.
Hey,
but-
no,
You too.
Tim. Thanks for getting stuff started.
Yeah,
Thanks
no
for
problem,
covering
man.
for me.
Hey,
Yeah.
let me do a plug real quick. Tomorrow night, Greek Bible study, 5 o'clock Pacific. Philotimo
5
Forum
Pacific?
YouTube
Is
channel.
that what you said?
What's that?
Time again? Sorry.
5 o'clock.
Couldn't hear you.
Let me put my
Okay.
channel in
5
the
o'clock, which time zone?
Pacific.
So 6, no, 7 for me. Okay, that's good. I can make that.
So I'll put it in the comments. Carry on, guys.
Thanks, Tim. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. See you tomorrow.
Yeah.
I need
You
to
an
do
admin now, Ted? Do you have admin powers or what?
Who?
We're trying to get that set up.
Okay.
Still no? Okay. I didn't know that. Because you
Yeah.
didn't reach out to me. So I'm like, oh, maybe he's
Yeah.
not doing a stream. And then Tim did it. So I was like, oh, okay.
No,
Tim's doing
no. I thought I had it set up, and then I said, Jacob, I'm having troubles, and he said, Tim's covering for you. So, yeah, he's giving me.
Gotcha.
He's getting those
that's-
things figured out. Yeah.
I meant I got
So, well-
dinner before you got on, which was nice.
Say that again.
I meant I was able to. I had time to eat dinner before you got on, which was nice.
Oh, that's Look, I knew I was driving. We're driving home, and I thought, I know there's a reason I'm an hour late. So it may have just been so that Emma could have her dinner, and
There you go.
that's sufficient.
Well, I was
that is
also an
sufficient
hour
reason.
late that I planned driving home. So
Providence is here.
Yeah.
meant
Yeah,
I got
Emma,
an extra hour with my friends.
Nice. I'm interested to see your conversation with PVK. It looked like you guys were getting into this whole idea of like, how do you well, it's sort of the question that got raised at the conference, like how do you form people, and do you are there the attitudes around that are really interesting. I for one reason, I feel like I get frequently misinterpreted on the camp of, I think that there are ways where you can just stamp people out that come out the same all the time, because I'm like, I highly recommend certain ways of raising children and living life. And I feel like somehow that always comes across as me, people thinking that I'm like, if you do things the Ted way, nothing will go wrong.
See, it's because there are so many people running around there literally advertising their curricula based on, if you do things our way, nothing will go wrong.
Golly, it's like,
And
have
that's why
ever
you
been
need to give us
alive?
so much money.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, listen, look, if I pay that much for my child's education, it can't go wrong. Like, look at how much money I'm paying. It's got to work out just right.
Yeah. Cale Zeldin talks about that too. And then he talks about too, that unconscious underlying fear that they know they're wrong. Like, oh no, not everyone's going to get into the Ivy League school despite the Catholic school high school. It's like, that's right. Right. And so
I
they
didn't.
know it's a chairs on the Titanic sort of a situation. And who knows where that's going to end. But again, that's unconscious, according to Cale, which I saw that. I was in New England.
I think it really depends on the person. I think for some people, it's actually very conscious. But for some people, it's always there in some capacity. I think he's probably right.
Yeah, but you're right. They've reduced it down to a procedure, right? It's not poetic for them.
Yep.
It's procedural. But yeah, if somebody told me that about you, Ted, I'd just look at them funny and say, like, obviously you've never actually talked to Ted. So maybe you talked to an image of Ted in your head, a model, but you didn't talk to Ted. I'm sure he doesn't. He doesn't. Yeah, that's not how he thinks at all.
Don't bow down to that idol. Yeah, Sorry, Emma. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure with, 4 kids, you found that some things work better for some of them than others, and you have to like at least adjust a little bit.
So I missed a tiny bit of that because my internet's fritzing out. But the thing that I feel like I'm looking at and trying to balance, like on the one hand, right, like I actually have a divine obligation to protect my children's innocence appropriately. So that's one side of it. The other side is that, like, I don't know if you know the term anti-fragility, but like children are anti-fragile. Like, they're seriously anti-fragile. Like, that's how children work. And so I think a lot of parenting, at least to me, it's sort of on a practical level, comes down to this constant back and forth between, how do I expose you to enough possible harm that you can get stronger while simultaneously preserving your innocence? So a lot of that comes down to like letting them play on the playground and possibly tripping and falling, or like letting them figure it out with each other, right? Like not getting in there all the time when they're having conflict, things like that. Because on the innocent side, like, it's a lot easier for me to just say, like, no, these are things that we're not going there. But what comes out of that is, like, it just feels like it becomes immediately obvious that I can't control that process. Like I just can't. Like the idea that like there's a process that would bring about good people is so silly to me. Like the number of times when we were sitting in Chino and I was nudging Dr. Jim and quoting that line from T.S. Eliot, where men dreaming of systems so perfect no one has to be good. I was like, yeah, because Vervaeke is saying these things about like this continual desire to take wisdom and turn it into rules and like make those rules into laws. And it's like, that's never worked and it never will work. And I'm like, yes, that's right. And that is, and so there's like, absolutely there's guiding principles, like right, homeschool my kids. I'm not sending my kids to school, but that also doesn't mean that like, then there's this other extreme where it's weird. I met this one lady one time who her parents, there's a book in like one of the little chapter books, you know, with the little kitty pictures and stuff. The kid steals something from a store and gets punished. And so they cut that chapter out of the book so that she wouldn't know that stealing could happen. And you're like, that's that thing where you're like, this sort of like programmatic idea of children. I don't know. It's weird. It's like, have you met children? That's what I always think.
That is weird. Also, like, I'm sorry, any like 2-year-old can come up with the idea of stealing by themselves.
Well, and you don't even need an idea, right? You just need to try things. Like, because
True.
That's what they do. Everybody ignores the exploratory aspect. Like Peterson doesn't talk about it for Vegas. Nobody talks about this third mode. Everyone's stuck with the Maslow's non-hierarchy of needs. That's a bunch of garbage, basically. And Maslow didn't conceive of it that way, right? And this, well, what humans really do is they're binary computers that move towards pleasure and away from pain. And it's like, that is observably false. You're just wrong. Sometimes we're just running around exploring. Most of the time we're in a neutral position, but sometimes we're actually running around exploring to see what can be done. And yeah, children do that a lot because they're learning, and you learn through failure.
Kind of their whole job.
Fail, you didn't learn, right? And people just ignore that whole aspect of humans.
Well, you know, it's interesting, Mark. I think it was Peterson somewhere where he's talking about he was suggesting that all this crazy stuff that we see with like people as physical adults, you know, physically speaking, they're adults, that they're acting out this crazy stuff where they're like, I'm a fox, I'm an elf, you know, it's all these things. Like, yeah, that just sounds like, I think it was in his conversation with who's the parkour guy? Rafe Kelly. With Rafe Kelly, where he's like, that's probably just like the play that they never got to have. Like they never got to play. And so they never got, because I remember growing up, like, man, I had these stories that I'd run out and act out that like they lasted for months, you know, with these like whole narrative arcs that I was embodying and like, you know, fighting these imaginary, you know, monsters and it all strung together. And it's like, if you never got that,
there's still children affected.
There's still children.
That's really what it is.
Yeah.
They're still young children. They never
they're 4.
Managed to get past that.
Some of them are 3, to be fair, but some of them are 4. You know, 4 is good.
Well, and so then I wonder, Emma, what do you think about this in your classical education stuff? The idea of, do you think that it would be proper to see classical education, at its best, something more like holding out ideals to children, to people that are being educated, rather than telling them like how to be, right? Because the idea is sort of like
that's definitely part of
going through this. You're saying, look at this person. This person was great, and this is why they were great. Here's another person. This is why they were great. And here's another person. This is why they were great. And like, can you inhabit that in some way? Versus saying these are the things that you have to believe to be great, or these, you know, to be excellent or to be good or whatever it is.
Well, that's
and I think that's why it's
training.
best done, especially at younger ages, through story.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it gives them those ideas to
doing fairy
embody.
tales now,
and it's a more embodied way to learn than. I was talking about this with my friend who's a 1st and 2nd grade teacher at a classical school, actually. How anything she tells in a story form, the kids like immediately remember forever, and they'll like play at it on the playground and everything. Like she had them like, they know the War of 1812. They know the names of all the different ships. Like they're set up. She went to war with ChatGPT actually, because ChatGPT told her that it's inappropriate to teach. I think it was the War of 1812, to first and second graders because they can't handle the complexity of it. She was trying to
Oh
get it to
my.
generate a first or second grade test on the
my.
War of 1812, and it was like, you shouldn't teach that to children. It's too complicated.
That is so weird. Well, related to that is it's been really interesting with our children, like starting to go to we're bringing them to Catholic Mass every week, and the way that
Oh
they
yeah, I
started
got to go to
having
Latin Mass
that.
today. That's what I wanted to talk to you about.
Oh, well, I'm happy to talk about that. And Mark, I don't know how much if you want to hang out for that, but yeah, it's interesting to see that the way that they start, and like it's also like micro stories, right? So like I didn't teach them to kneel when we pray. I never once told them kneel down, you should kneel when we're praying. And like my oldest daughter will like get out of her chair when we're blessing them. We don't even kneel down when we bless. We don't kneel down when we bless the meal, but like
Most
she'll get out of her
people
chair and kneel to pray for that. And it's like,
That's
'cause
really
she sees
cute.
she sees the story. She sees the story and she's like, oh, when we do this, then you act that way. And yeah, I mean, it's really, that's the kind of thing. And I was talking about this with my wife and sister in the car, and I was trying to pick apart wisdom, which is something that people have been doing forever. And I was reading the book of wisdom because now I'm going through all the, the director's cut of the Bible. And what was striking me was the book of wisdom is saying, like, if you seek wisdom, you'll find it. It's not like if you seek wisdom, like, and you do a good job or something. It's like, no, this is what you should do. You should seek wisdom. And so then I was thinking about Mary Bennett in Pride and Prejudice. And she's apparently seeking wisdom, right? Because all she ever does is like read sermons and like books of pithy statements and has like her extracts. And like every single time she like tries to bring her wisdom, it falls like so flat. Like it's like excruciating. I almost can't read the parts where she is because I like experience physical pain when people are being awkward, and it's bad enough that like when it's in a book, it hurts. And
have you seen
so
the
1996 the long BBC
miniseries?
one with Colin Firth as Mr.
Colin
Darcy?
Firth.
So I grew up with like every year or two, my mother would watch through that, and so like piecing it together. It was really weird when I went and watched. I can't remember what the movie was about the CIA operative that was like involved in hunting down bin Laden, and it was that same actress because I had grown up and it was like, that's Elizabeth Bennet, and then she's this like chain smoking CIA operative, and I was like, what are you doing? This is so weird.
My childhood is destroyed.
Yeah, but Mary Bennett, it's like, what? She's seeking wisdom. Like, why does she? And and my sister and I had a really interesting conversation about like her lack of humility. Right. And especially considering that the book is Pride and Prejudice, you're like, okay, that makes sense. But it's like wisdom isn't about the things that you've been told about wisdom. Say, for instance, a woman can never be too careful about her reputation. That's wise. Telling everyone at the dinner table when you've just found out that your sister went off and eloped with a blackguard, it's like not the time. And so it was really reinforcing. It's like wisdom is not knowing a woman can never be too careful of her reputation. Wisdom is knowing when to say that and when not to say that. And so it's like,
but Ted, that's the difference between Vervaeke's propositional knowledge.
Yes.
Right? Like,
yes.
I read about wisdom and now I have it. No. The things you read about are not things you seek. Like it's improper seeking or something, right? The way you seek wisdom is by being in and observing the world. And with this education thing, and I do have a video on education versus training. Training is procedural.
Oh, I need to watch that. I haven't gotten it yet.
Education is about exemplification, right? And so when things are being exemplified, when you're involving yourself in them, when you're participating with them, when you're seeing other people participate, because that's before you participate, you want to see other people participate. That isn't always how it works, right? Like, to talk about, elf stories. We used to run around the woods in the back of the Catholic junior high when I was attending, and the Tolkien-esque world we lived in those woods, right? Like, we all had characters, and that was several. But doing that, either acting it out or watching somebody else do it, that's exemplification, right?
Yes.
Either by direct exemplification of doing it or watching somebody, and that's participatory knowing, as Vervaeke would call it information, but whatever, it doesn't matter, right? And that's seeking. Like, that's actual seeking. The
Yeah.
For false engagement in the propositions is not seeking, because language is so flat compared to action that it just doesn't cut it. Like, and it's not that it's not helpful. It's not that we don't need it. It's not that it doesn't do anything, but it can't get you there. Right.
can't
It's
do
it.
like Zeno's paradox. It can't get you to the wall.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Mark, I'd go back to something much more like when we were talking about the whole interaction between like genetics and narrative, or like the dirt and the story, right? Where they're feeding into each other.
So much for addressing all that. I thought I was going to die. I really did. I was like, oh my God, what is going on here?
It's fine, man. It's like, dude, that's the world that I was in my education, like when I was in school. And then like I finally like got the tools to actually talk about why that was nuts. And now it's like really relaxed. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I get it. What you're saying is true, but like, it's also so half true that it's not true. And so like, let's talk about it. But Emma, what did you want to know about Latin Mass? Now that it's late and everyone else is left,
well, I guess I'm just curious, like, what do you like best about it? Because I don't dislike it, but I don't like it like significantly more than regular Mass.
Yeah. So yeah.
So I'm always curious about people's takes on it.
Yeah, it's okay, so I've got one question. Mm-hmm. Have you been to has it been low Mass that you've mostly been to, or has it been like sung Mass?
Like Sunday Mass? It was Sunday Mass.
Sunday Mass, where like most of it is sung, like you've got a choir that's singing the stuff, or is it low Mass where it's like pretty much all quiet and
I've only been to ones with choirs, to be honest.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. So I mean, first of all, it is not.
Well, I used to be in a Latin choir, so that helped.
Oh, nice.
Choir,
yeah. I love it. I mean, my wife and I sing in the choir every Sunday. You know, the kids are kind of crawling over us. They've got a couple of choir friends, which helps, but like
that's really cute.
We get a little bit of looks from where like, you know, it's like everyone else in the choir is either not married or a grandmother.
That's really cute.
Everyone else is with their kids, and we're like, no, this is just too important for us. So hoping we'll inspire, because there's a couple other young parents who've got some phenomenal voices. There's one of the dads who he actually led for the Feast of Corpus, the external solemnity of the Feast of Corpus Christi today, he's a phenomenal cantor. And there's a lot to be gleaned from, like when Joshua comes and leads choir, I sing about 3 times better than normally. And you're like, that's interesting. There's just something about that. Him and me, his conducting, the way his voice is resonating in my ear, the way I can watch him and imitate him unconsciously. Like, I just sing so much better. It's amazing. So there's something to that. There's, you know, Mark, to your earlier point. But so the first thing I would say is that like, it's not like an immediately attractive thing. Like it doesn't like shine out, to use sort of Peugeot's language. Like it is a hidden thing that like takes a considerable amount of effort in some ways to get to. So like the first time I went to a Latin Mass it was like the third time I'd even ever been in a Catholic service, was at a Benedictine monastery. And so they like in the monastery, they've got where, you know, all the laity can come. And then there's like the altar rail, and then there's all the monks, and then there's the high altar. So everything interesting that's going on is like, you kind of need binoculars. And then there's like 4 6'5" guys in front of me, and it's freezing cold because it's mid-November. And so I was basically just like, my back was cramping up, and all I could see was like a few incense coming up from the back of the church. I was like, you know, I'm having all these conversations. We're not Catholic yet. Having all these conversations with this friend of mine who's a traditional Catholic, and he's talking about the Latin Mass and all this. And I'm like, okay, like this is not really drawing me right now. But here's the thing. So when we went to the Abbey, you're driving through the backwoods of Oklahoma, and there's just like woods and pastures. And then all of a sudden you come around a corner, and you're like, those trees over there, like there's less undergrowth, and like they kind of look cared for. And then you come around and you're like, oh, because that's Abbey land. And there's, you know, it's the land belonging to the Abbey. And there's, you know, there's the arch with the sign over it. And you drive in, and then there's like these pastures, and then there's vegetable gardens, and then there's like the orchard and the vineyard. And then you come around, and there's the Abbey and the church. And so there's these like concentric, and I know I've brought this up before, there's these concentric rings of order, right? It's increasingly ordered as you're moving in towards the Abbey. And then you go in the church and you've got the same thing going on. And I did know enough about what was going on to know that when they ring the bells a bunch of times, that's at the consecration. I did know that much. And so they rang the bells, but at the Abbey, they don't just ring the bell right there at the altar, they ring the church bells.
Oh, that's cool.
And then because it was it was just the high mass at the monastery, they all do the kiss of peace, right? So they the priest who's offering the mass and those who are serving with him, he kisses them, and then they come back and they kiss they go to one side and they kiss a couple of monks, and then those monks start kissing each other and it comes down the line, right? And then they go over to the other side, and it's like South
Like
American
the fire
kissing.
at the Easter Vigil.
Yes, exactly. And so you have the consecration, and bam, it's ringing, and then the bell goes out into the hole, right? You've got the movement of everything in towards the altar in terms of ordering, and you have the consecration and the bell in the form of sound. It moves that moment of union between heaven and earth back out into the world, but not just with sound. Then you have it in the piece that, let's say, is enacted in order that it might be instantiated amongst the brothers, right? Because everyone knows that monks get on each other's nerves because you've got a bunch of guys living in the same house together for 40 years.
It's going to happen.
It's going to happen. And so you've got this piece that they're acting out, right? The kiss of peace. And then the host is distributed to them, and then everyone comes up and receives that. And then at the end of the mass, they all go out into the world. And so you see, it's like a diagram. You're like, this is, especially if you're Catholic, you're like, this is where life comes from. This is where beauty comes from. This is where good order comes from. This is where peace comes from. You see it. In one sense, there's not a question. It's just inviting you to believe it, because believing is really hard to do. Making something an operational reality, particularly something like the miracle of transubstantiation, where if you're a materialist or you're just a person, it's really hard because, man, all the aspects look exactly the same. How do I know that anything happened? Right. And so that was part of it. That really stuck with me.
Yeah.
Another thing is I found that I have, okay. How can I put it? So another way is, what is that Overton window? The Overton window of acceptable political discourse. Have you heard of this? Where it's whatever the midpoint is determines on either side how far you, okay. What Latin Mass does in my life is it shifts the Overton window of reverence, way to the side. So if you're listen, most of my life is kind of laid back and casual and irreverent. Oh, okay. Right. It's and then I go to church, a lot of churches, and it's everyone's in their jeans, their shirts aren't tucked in. We're all casually sitting back, and then we're jamming out to some rock music, and there's some cool lights. And then we have a buddy talk with a guy at the front of the stage, and then we all hang out afterwards. It's was that more reverent than the rest of my life? I have no idea, honestly.
Right. There's no contrast.
So then I go somewhere where it's dead silent when you come in. It's dead silent, except some squirmy babies, because everyone at Latin Mass has babies. I mean, they're just everywhere. It's half the congregation is babies. It's unbelievable, which is something else I love. You're look, there's just so much life here. This should tell you something. Everyone who comes here wants to have babies. It's that should, when you look at that contrast is something, but it's it's quiet. And then everything that's going on is really ordered and very solemn. And you get to participate in it, but you don't get to choose how you participate in it. You are told how you're going to participate in it. And it is everything is really precise, because it came out of, depending on how you want to look at it, all the way back to the Jews, all the way up, at least to the Council of Trent. It's pretty, very little change for the last 500 years. I mean, this thing, it's here we are. We're pretty serious that this is the way you should do it.
I think a reasonable conservative estimate, if you're going not just from the Council of Trent, is the reign of Charlemagne for the specific form of the Tridentine Mass.
Yeah. So what happens there is that basic in my the way I like talking about it now is that takes my Overton window of reverence and just blows it up here. Yeah. It's I can't get up there right now. It's a struggle, right? I'm negotiating having children. distractions, all sorts of things. But like now I've got room to breathe. And like I have like seen profound changes in my life, in my wife's life, in our family's life, in the way our household goes. Right. Like I was talking about my daughter getting down and kneeling. It's like, right, we've raised like thanking God for our food. It's like all of a sudden that's way more important. And it's at this other level, right? Because we've given it room to breathe. Like our family prayer time, all of these things, it gives it space to all of a sudden to something to move towards.
Right.
So that's part of it. And then you could get down in the nitty gritty of it. I don't personally hold the Tridentine Mass up as being like the only liturgy. Like I've been to Divine Liturgy at an Antiochian Orthodox church. I've listened to many recordings of it. It's astonishing and stunning. Like I have nothing to say against it as liturgy. Like I don't, but this is what I have. I can't go to a Byzantine Catholic church anywhere. The nearest one's 6 hours away. So this is in terms of liturgy that is like deeply rooted in the tradition and has that sort of lifting the window on reverence. This is what I've got. And so I'm going to participate in it. There's all sorts of, again, I'm also not going to die on the Latin hill, but I will tell you this, you're doing your thing. You come into the church, you come in, and it's getting increasingly solemn, right? You're talking out in the foyer with an narthex. And as you come into the nave, like no one's talking, you kneel as you come in. And then, for a sung mass, you have the entrance hymn, which is in English. And then it's everything. And then it's mostly Latin, but then you also have the sermon and the readings in English, the rereading of the scriptures in English. And then you get into the creed, particularly it's sung. And after that, everything is in Latin until the recessional, which is in English again, but it's still sung, right? It's still music. And then you leave. And so it formed this chiasm, right? Where you're saying like what the church building does, which is you have the holiest place, and then you have the holy place, and then you have the intermediate space, and then you have the world around you, which is it's profane, and that's fine that it's profane. And we can talk about why it's fine that it's profane. You have to have something that's profane in order to have something that's sacred, right? Like you have to have that. So what it does is it says linguistically, it forms that same structure. Now, I'm not saying this is the only way that liturgy can be done, but like particularly the Latin Mass, it forms a linguistic temple structure. Yeah,
I see that. I do love a good chiasm.
Yes. So there's a great chiasm there. And then particularly with the silence around the consecration, like that's the center of it. Again, that's the center on all these things. So yeah, I could go into a few other things, but that's really the main stuff. One other thing I'll say is I really like, there's a way of understanding liturgy that is, I don't know where it comes from in the Eastern Fathers, but it's there. And I got it from Daniel Toma, which is that there's a basic way of looking at church liturgy, which is that it's the progression from purgation to illumination to union. So you start by, and you can see this in the Novus Ordo. I'm not, it's right. You have the Kyrie and the Confitore, the I confess, right? So you're confessing your sins and you're turning away from the things of this world. And then you're illuminated by the readings and the homily and the creed, right? So now you're receiving your mind is and heart are hopefully being illuminated by the divine word and by the teaching of the church. And then that moves towards the union and communion, right? You're united to God. And so to me, that structure is very, very clear in the Tridentine Mass. Like it's very helpful. Particularly the purgation part of it, like especially with the this may be something that's maintained in Novus Ordo parishes. I've just never seen it where there's the sprinkling of the Aspergus May, the sprinkling of water at the beginning of Mass. So you have this ritual reenactment of baptism. The Confitore is done multiple times. The Kyrie is sung. You get to kind of like take your time with the Kyrie. I don't know. It really helps me see that 3-part structure of purgation, illumination, and union really clearly. So
that makes sense. I think actually mostly you're reminding me that I'm really spoiled at my Novus Ordo parish because I have a really good parish here, and it's like
praise God.
Really traditional, it still has a communion rail. And they serve okay.
Yeah, that's a whole other thing.
They distribute communion at the communion rail.
Yes. See, that's
Like they
not-
do it other
that's-
places too, but they do it at the communion realm. So
Yeah.
I'm just
Yeah.
really lucky, and I don't know what I'm gonna do when I move away. But
Yeah. Well,
maybe
God-
maybe by then
provide.
my husband will be ready for a Latin mass. He's only been
Well, the
Catholic
nice-
for 2 years, so
Well, that's so funny. We're weird. We're weird like that. And we're one of those people that jumped all the way in. And like, I could almost describe our conversion as being a liturgical conversion rather than a theological conversion. It was really the weight of realizing that like I was being formed by liturgy, whether I wanted to or not, whether wanted to be or not. And I was being formed by the world's liturgy. And if I was attempting to worship in a way that had this ill-formed and, let's say, mostly thoughtless liturgy, and then I was spending most of my life out in the world, I was like, I'm not going to be shaped like Christ if I do that. And so that was like a huge impetus. And so that's kind of what, like, launched us in the
that's really
direction
interesting.
that we went in. So
And yet you ended up Catholic and not Orthodox, unlike everybody else around here.
not everybody, but yeah, that's an interesting point. It was hard to say no to St. Thomas Aquinas. I'll be honest. I had already read enough Thomistic stuff that it was really hard to be like, yeah, we're just going to go ahead and like push all that aside. It was fun. So I actually also did I think immediately after I did a Randos conversation with Paul Vanderklay, which apparently I didn't say anything good enough to get clipped. So if you want your ego boosted, Emma, he clipped you and not me. So there you go.
He
So
said
I know you're
right.
looking at those comments.
I thought he said right after that he was gonna have to like take it and make a teaser of it, and I thought he meant like at the beginning of the video. You know how
That's
sometimes
hilarious.
you do like a couple sentences and then you go into the whole. But no, he uploaded a whole separate video, and I was like, oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So one of he was asking me about becoming Catholic, and I mentioned Aquinas, and he's like, it's funny. All these guys on here that become Orthodox, they're always talking about the liturgy, and all these people that become Catholic, they're like Aquinas and Catholic integralism and this other stuff. He's like, but no one ever says, oh, I went to mass and like the priest there was just like this great homily about St. Thomas Aquinas. He's like, I never hear that. So, well, what's really funny is I didn't bring it up because the conversation went another direction, but we went to mass today, and like the first thing that our priest there brings up is he's talking about like the Thomistic understanding of like digestion and plants assimilating matter and all of this like hierarchy of being in the purgation of matter, all in a Thomistic frame. I was like, yeah, maybe other places not, but here we do get St. Thomas Aquinas like every single Sunday.
That's fascinating. I would expect that
That
from
is-
a Protestant because they rely on the preaching to
Yeah.
do all the work because that's all
Yeah.
they have. They don't have good liturgy. They don't have symbolism. They don't have good music. It's really and I think the difference with the Orthos and the Catholic is that the Catholic is closer to what I call middle way, right, or third wayism. Than anything else, because the Protestants are all lovey-dovey, come and go, whatever, who cares? The Orthodox are like, no, you're here, you climb this mountain, So they're very much, these hard slope guys, but the Catholic really is kind of in the middle. I mean, I'm not happy with any of it at this point, although your stuff sounds good, Ted. But I think too the Latin Mass, I mean, if you use sort of the knowledge engine model that we use. It's like, well, the Latin Mass makes more sense because you can't idolize the text because you don't understand it, and so it focuses you more on the liturgy. You're not over focused on the words and what does that mean, and you're not interpreting them. You're just sort of involved more in the participation in the thing because you don't have that handle of the words to focus on. And what I heard you talking about was the connectedness, and Vervaeke a long time ago, I think it was in the middle of fake news virus scam there that first year, talked to this guy Jacob Kashir, and it was fascinating because he was like, oh, I'm stuck in Greece, in Athens. Greece.
You're talking about this, yeah.
No one's stuck in Athens, Greece, buddy. Right, but he goes to the Orthodox Church, he sees all the symbols. And nothing happens. And he was a psychedelics user. Like he kind of knows there's no profound experience here. But he leaves the Greek Orthodox Church. He leaves it. And then as he's walking through the city, click. It all starts to click. right? Because then he sees the patterns that were in the church in gold and outlined in the world. And he goes, oh, right. And so that's right. It's the same sort of thing. It's like the encounter with the thing is not the point because it's too easy to idolize things. But once you see the connections, because now the world's not flat, right? It's re-enchanted for you. Now all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is how we interact in the world. Like this is exemplification and participation.
Well, and Mark, just like because there's two levels to this, I would argue that what you're talking about is something much more like an appropriate view of like the sacramental aspect of the faith versus the actual sacraments. So things like holy water, which can affect grace in your life, but are also living much more in the symbolic world, right? In the symbolic world, in the sense of being a pure symbol versus a true sacrament. And so I'm just because I'm Catholic and I really believe this, I'm just going to make that distinction. I'm not going to hold you to that distinction at all. But I'm like, there's a real difference between.
Are sacramentals pure symbols?
No, they're not.
No.
But they don't
Not
guarantee.
sacraments, sacramentals.
Sacramentals, as far as I know, no one quote me on this, but I believe there's no guarantee that they affect grace. So like they're great to have, and they're not pure symbols. Like something's really happened there, but you're not guaranteed to receive grace if you say like get sprinkled with the holy water or pray with a blessed rosary, as opposed to going and like receiving communion in a state of grace. That like
Gotcha.
Yeah,
I wasn't quite understanding what you were saying.
And so what Mark is talking about in that like that ability for those patterns to speak to you, that's much more like the level that's not what the Catholic Church is teaching about the seven sacraments. It's much more like what is the liturgy doing to you as it's forming you in such a way where you can see the world and operate it appropriately, operate in it appropriately, not operate it inappropriately.
I think you were going deeper than I was. I mean, my only point was to avoid idolatry.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
You don't want to understand the propositions. The less you understand propositions, the easier
confess
it is
myself
to
in a
avoid
very
idolatry.
unique position there with regards to the Latin Mass. So
What's that?
I mostly understand Latin. If they're not when they're speaking like super fast, I don't really get it. But especially when I'm reading in the book, I get the Latin.
And that's not well, for one thing, like still a bunch of the stuff is going on. The priest is ad orientem, and so you just don't hear a bunch of the stuff unless you're reading along in a missal.
He's not speaking so that you can hear.
Yeah, exactly, because he's speaking to God.
Yeah.
Right.
So
don't have to hear it.
So Emma, what's interesting is after college, I spent quite a bit of time down in Peru. This is back when I was still an evangelical Christian, and I was pretty much fluent in Spanish, right? So like I'd go days where I basically just speak Spanish and no English, and I was way past the like mental translation stuff. I'd been studying it for years. It was fine. I could have long extended conversations with people, but then I would go to church and it's all like translated Hillsong and stuff, right?
Right.
I don't even know if you know what Hillsong is. I keep forgetting your.
I actually do because I'm married a Protestant.
Oh, well, okay, great.
When I married him, he wasn't a Protestant, but he used to be.
Yes. So all that stuff just like translated into Spanish in a way that like sort of retained the meaning and sort of matched the music. But since it's like CCM, it's like you can just kind of have the vowel. Who cares about syllable count and rhyming or anything? It doesn't matter as long as But even though I knew the songs and I knew the words in English and I knew the words in Spanish, it was super hard to engage with it for some reason. And then here we are years later, and I'm singing hymns in Latin that I sort of understand and not really. Way easier to engage with. So there's something about the whole thing that even when, and I would not say that like now that I know a lot more Latin because I'm around it, 1 to 3 times a week for a year now, and I already have some background in the Romance languages. Like it's not that hard to start picking it up.
No, it's not.
It's not. I don't
especially once you
find.
have Romance language exposure.
Yeah, I don't find that. It's weird. Like my engagement with Latin as a liturgical language is very different from trying to do praise and worship in a language that's not my native language. That is a very different experience from engaging with a liturgical language, for what that's worth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Something about it being a liturgical language probably changes that. I don't know.
what it is. Yeah. But Mark, you might find this interesting. We maybe 2 or 3 months ago, there's a part in the and I don't know if you know this, there's a part in the mass called the propers, and they change every week. And there's five parts that are typically sung of the propers. And so there's the men in the choirs at our parish sing them, and it's all Gregorian chant. And so one of the things that you can do if you have enough good singers there is that you sing what's called an epson. It's the drone. It's the bass note. It's the note that everything comes out of and resolves to, because Gregorian chant is like that. So it always comes out of the root note and it always resolves there. And so there's a thing that people sometimes do where they just one or two or three singers, well, better, you can't have just one because they got to breathe at some point. At least two singers will just sing that epson the whole time. And the first time I did it was there's a seminary student and myself, and there's like 3 other people who could chant well enough. So they took the chant, and me and the seminary student sang this epson, and it was like 4 or 5 minutes. It was a long time. That was so weird. It was weird, man. So you're like hyper conscious of this other person because you're trying to track breathing with them so that you don't overlap. You're also hitting this like really, really resonant note that's pretty low down. And if we're both basses, it's a pretty low note. And but 45 seconds in, your like lips kind of start to go numb and like your head's kind of buzzing. Dude, it was a strange experience. Like it.
Yeah. well, that's interesting too, because that's in the Eastern, like everybody, oh, look at this chanting with Om, and then it goes back to Om. And it's like, that's in the West. Like everyone makes this hay about, what we need to do is we take the East and the West and they're the same. There's nothing to synthesize. You're nuts. You're missing stuff. Like read Ecclesiastes and the Tao Te Ching at the same time. Then we'll talk about how different the East and the West are in terms of spiritual beliefs and systems, or to your point, I mean, the greatest experience I ever had was at an ashram chanting. And I was just blown away to the point where I was like, I'm like looking around. Did they put something in the air?
Yes. Yeah.
Like, what is going on here? Right?
Yeah.
Like it's powerful, especially when you get a room full of people chanting with a chant leader. It's like, holy macaroni. It's powerful.
That does stuff. I mean, I had a couple of interesting conversations with Nate Heil about just singing. Like it was interesting how many times Chino, at the end of Chino, it's like singing kept coming up over and over. There's something, I mean, to me, like singing the creed, right? There's just something about singing, the Nicene Creed, that there's a fusion there between, this whole issue of the 4 Ps and all of this. And it's like, when you're in a church service and you chant the creed of the Christian faith, it's like, all of a sudden, all of those questions go away, and it's just like, here you are.
You don't need answers because you're participating in them. Like
because you're participating. It's all of it because, at any rate, it all just collapses down to this one thing. It's just, I love it. I really, really love it. Yeah. There's a less common creed called oh goodness, Emma, you can help me out with this one. Which is the one that's not by Athanasian Creed? The Athanasian Creed. Yeah. That's like crazy long, and they used to chant that. I think it took like 10 minutes.
Really, isn't that one just? It's either really about the Trinity or it's really about Jesus's divinity.
Yes, it's both. Yeah, the Trinity part, it goes through and it's like, the Father is God. The Father is not the Son. The Father is not the Holy Ghost. The Son is God. The Son is not the Father. The Son is not the Holy Ghost. The Holy Ghost is God. The Holy Ghost is not the Son. The Holy Ghost is not the Father. It's like, it's every single way that you could get it mixed up. It's also the one that says that, what is it? That God became man, it's something like, not by man becoming God, but by the taking of the manhood, not by the reducing of the Godhead to man, but by taking man into the Godhead. It's something like that. There's some really beautiful formulation of the incarnation in there that's just exquisite.
That is lovely.
Any rate, it used to be sung like 3 or 4 times in the year. They'd sing the whole Athanasian Creed, and I'm like, bring it back. I'm ready for the 10-minute creedal chant.
I was just about to say that we should do that every Trinity Sunday. So
yeah, it'd be that would be a great time. There's probably, and then on the feast day of St. Athanasius, or there's 3 or 4 times you could do that. But Yeah, Mark, it's really interesting. I mean, I get why Pedro is always like, just go to church. Like
Yeah.
you can sit there and you can talk about all this stuff, and then you go and you sing mass, and it's like, okay, I'm good. I mean, I'm not good, but I'm good with those problems. Hey, Jacob,
Hello.
Hello.
I saw the
Jacob.
shadow of death behind you. Look
The
out!
shadow of death
Oh,
is
no.
about to pounce.
Oh. I know my cat's really mad at me because I've been gone all weekend, and then she could sit on my lap, but she apparently doesn't want to. She just wants to yell at me. So
Oh my goodness, cats and the internet. There's nothing like them.
Yeah, we're back to ancient Egypt, writing cats on walls. It's great.
Yep. Or as my
So
uncle
what's this
likes
I
to-
hear about you going to graduate school, Ted? Nobody believes
Oh
you
my-
went to graduate school.
what did you do? I'm interested in this too.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I quit.
That's fair.
No, I did my undergrad, and then I was gonna go on to do a master's program in biology, and I started running in the short answer is I started running into problems with the kinds of projects that were acceptable and also the limitations of my character and skill set. So I quit grad school for 2 years, and then I came back to finish my master's, and none of those things had resolved. And so I loved all my coursework as a grad student, and just was not about what it was going to take to do a master's thesis. So then I was
Well,
like,
I mean, how do you do biology when you're not allowed to recognize a difference between male and female?
that hadn't happened yet, if you can believe that. Yeah.
Did any of you pay any attention to Dawkins' latest interview on Unheard?
No, is this no? I know that he
Like,
started to get in trouble
A
with.
lot of people mentioning it, but I haven't watched it. But I probably should.
I didn't watch it. I read a write-up of it, and
You can do that. Wait.
he it was on Twitter, and wow, that man has fallen.
Really?
Like
You were never up there, but okay.
yeah, I mean,
But there's a straight line between what he was saying back in the early 2010s and the epistemological nonsense that he's getting eaten by now.
this is
never
very
really
true.
what
This
he
is
says.
very true. So I guess the guy's name is Freddie, the guy on Unheard, said to him, "Well, you now admit that," and apparently, Dawkins after Chicago spent some time thinking about the stuff Brett Weinstein said and recognized he was being silly, in not recognizing that the fact that a vast majority of humanity has always been religious and continues to be religious shows that it must be an evolutionary adaptation.
Kind of obvious, but yeah.
Kind of obvious, but so Freddie asked him, well, now you recognize that religion is actually an adaptation and it's beneficial for you. And his response was something along the lines of, yeah, but it's not true, so I don't care.
Yeah.
Which
Well,
which
that's
led me
modern.
to ask the question, so what if you don't believe that evolutionary adaptation is true, why are you an evolutionary biologist?
Yeah, he could weasel his way out of it and say, well, sometimes evolution gets stuff wrong. And therefore the fact that it evolved that way and like an unused limb is gonna fall off or they'll come up with some materialistic framing for all that nonsense. Don't worry.
I remember, Dawkins was kind of a boogeyman when I was in college. And frankly, because I didn't have any kind of vocabulary for it, when I read some of his stuff as a freshman, of totally messed me up for about 6 months. And it was really interesting to come back a year ago, 2 years ago, when Peterson had his interview with him. I say interview. When Peterson talked at Richard Dawkins is really what happened. But the point to me of that was not that there's anything very interesting that Peterson said per se in that interview, but like when he asked Dawkins the kinds of questions that like Peterson and the guys around him were asking, and you saw like Dawkins' total inability to even realize those were possible questions. I just felt like I had like, there's like the snake and someone just like broke the fangs off. And I was like, oh, yeah, I'm really not. That's like, it was just so weird. Like PVK talks about the sort of the new atheist, just like not ever really being answered, just being kind of like completely left behind because people realized that all of their objections and questions were absurd. It's like they never like lost the debate. Everyone was like, those are all stupid questions.
Well, but Ted, a lot of it too was just they were claiming answers that they didn't have, and people wanted answers to these questions. And maybe there are no answers, but the point is they weren't offering resolutions to anyone. And so it's like, well, you're really not solving the problem. Did the tree make a noise or not? It's like, well, like, fair enough, right? And then you need a deeper conversation, and they were all very shallow thinkers. Yeah.
But Jacob, your point about, you know, how in biology did you manage to do things when you couldn't answer whether things were male or female? That it wasn't at that point when I was in school. It was the question that I saw was like basically, how do you define species? Because there is I don't even know what the words that I would use here would be exactly, but there's a degree in which you have to realize that like humans are making rational decisions about the world, that like we're participating in our understanding of the world in some way, that there's not like circles drawn around things out in the wild that says this is species and this isn't species. All this stuff that Peugeot talks about in terms of center and margin, you know, the idea of a species was getting eaten up by the marginal exceptions. And so it's like, oh, we don't know how to define species anymore because our old ideas of like interbreeding populations that produce viable offspring doesn't work anymore. Because you have all these examples of like, I mean, a great example of that is there's various bird species where they went back and forth. So you had like the northern oriole, where you have a very distinct looking population of birds in the east and a very distinct looking population of birds in the west. And then, but they hybridize all the time in the Great Plains. And so they're like, this is one species. And then they went back and they're like, no, actually they're two separate species. And it's like, no, they're, you know, which is it? It's like, can you make, because in the middle they interbreed and you have these hybrids there, but you also definitely have stable, distinct populations that not only are genetically distinct, but they look different and they act differently. And that's the thing that's freaking people out, is that ideas like species definitions would be something other than, to the earlier conversation's point, some sort of, it's in there. If you can just get down in the genetics, you'll find out that there's definitely this like split that where you're far enough apart. I mean, it's to the point now where there's a it's called reticulating phylogeny is the term that I heard, which they found in like various coral organisms, where you'll have species split, then they'll come back together again. And so when you trace the phylogeny, it's not a branching tree. It looks like the diamond pattern on a snake. That's why it's called reticulating phylogeny. And it's like, so can we define species in any of those things? Because, you know, there's constant blending across all of them. And I would say, yes, you definitely can, because species are not about genetic distinctness. They're about looking at the world and saying, we can tell that these are different enough that they're worth talking about as separate species, as separate kinds of things, even if their things get fuzzy on the end. So that's
the relevance realization, right? That's the looking at things at the right layer of abstraction and having the right framing, making a huge difference in how well you can interact with the world. And that, I think, is the key that people aren't getting. Like, that's why Peterson's project with relevance realization, which he doesn't call it that, and Vervaeke's project with relevance realization is resonating, because people realize, oh, there's a way we can know good framing from bad framing. And good framing affords us more, modes of interaction in the world or something, right? Whereas bad framing affords us fewer or something. And I think that is the problem, though. The other thing that occurs to me is if you're paying attention to the margins, you can't find species. You can't find categories anymore. If you're paying attention to the center, you're ignoring and so you need that balance, right, between the two. And that we've lost the ability because people want clear, bright lines. Where is this? Let's look at the DNA. and let's figure out exactly where this thing is. And it's like, no, that's not going to work, because there's all of this stuff that's not in the DNA, because it's less than a third of the picture according to the math. Like, that's not even, like, that's not heresy. That's in the math for almost everything. It only accounts for a third of the effect. So it's not going to help you as much as you would like. It's not going to give you those clear, bright lines that you want.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the other thing that I haven't really followed, and this, the biologists that I spent time with were like organismal biologists and ecologists. So like, and that's the stuff that I really loved. All my interactions with the department, it was all moving towards like computational biology and microbiology and genetics. It was like, they're big hires in the department. You can see this other places is like, hey, we got this guy that like knows how to do really massive, complex computer models of some aspect of biology. And it's like, okay, but I came here because I wanted to look at birds.
Mhm.
I'd like to, it's like, that's what I'd like to be doing. And the other really big one that I just kind of made me mad, honestly, when I came across it is the role of teleology in biology, and realizing that I had been hoodwinked my entire education, because everyone's like, biology is totally driven by means, and nothing that is alive has purpose, can form purposes or intention. And then you have like one person like Stephen Talbot, who's not even in the academy, who writes one essay, and it's like, actually, it's pretty darn obvious that if you even crack open a microbiology textbook, you'll see like all kinds of words about intention and purpose, even at the level of, say, the replication of DNA. The word replicate implies intention. It's like,
Right.
You can't get away from intention at any scale there. And I remember reading that and just thinking, wow, who is more stupid? The people that, in this, or not stupid, blind. Who's more blind, me or the people that taught me my entire, career up until this point? And so I don't know. I just like, man, a lot of that stuff soured. In terms of like the idea of engaging with the academy like that. I also I'll be the first to admit that like I am really, really bad at doing like long-term unstructured things on the internet. And so part of quitting grad school was also because like, I just can't like do long-term research and data analysis and things like that on the internet. I just get too distracted. And I was like, I can't stand not getting stuff done. And so I quit so that I could do stuff where I'm not distracted. So now I do
With big machines.
Yeah, with big machines and man stuff,
Yes.
Yeah, because like I'm there, like I'm locked in on that stuff. I can't, just like open a web browser and you just like, first of all, if I have that kind of distraction, me or someone else is going to die.
Yeah. Right.
And second of all, like it just doesn't like, I'm too engaged with it. And so
Not interesting. Those other things aren't interesting when you can just like Og Smash. But Og Smash times 1,000.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's the thing. I mean, one of the things that's been really fun about like all of this stuff is that it's given me, not that I don't in the rest of my life. Like I have some really, really good friends that I've always been able to engage with on all sorts of levels, and I feel incredibly blessed by that. But this has been another way to sort of engage with that part of my life, especially after when I was a Protestant, I preached frequently, and now I don't, because that's not what laymen do. The laity do in the church. It's not a thing. And so
I mean, you could lead a Bible study or something. But
I could lead a Bible study or something. Yeah, but this is fun for me. This is really fun for me to get to kind of to re-engage with that stuff and work through all those ideas, and not just be doing it on my own to some degree. So to some degree, he says. To no degree. I got no degree from grad school.
Distributed cognition, baby. Right? It's harder when you're with other people being smart.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen and Emma, I'm gonna peace out for the evening and get some sleep. But Jacob, thank you for always dropping enjoyable conversation bombs into things. And Emma, Mark, it's great. See you guys.
Great talking to you.
Sleep well, sir. See you next week, I hope.
Yeah. Jacob, you're still muted.
So who drew those flowers behind him?
I keep meaning to ask him that because they're really pretty.
Good
They
question,
are.
Jacob. Bad timing. Best question
Yeah,
ever.
you should ask that
Worst
before you-
timing ever. Good job. Good job.
Sorry, I've been kind of busy lately, and even today, like I was half listening to this and writing a paper, and I'm still doing tons of stuff. Mark, you need to take over.
Take over what?
I don't know everything.
Everything? Oh, okay. Yeah, that'll make a lot of people happy.
I
People
thought
are already
Father-
worried that I'm taking over things I don't have any interest in even doing. So, yeah, saying that on the internet won't cause any kind of problems at all, Jacob. Thanks.
Emma, you need to take over.
I already have a friend who's planning to take over.
You
Take
do?
over the world. I saw a.
We used to sit together and divvy up the world map
Oh, excellent.
over the college dining room table and
That's
like
perfect.
bargain for what chunks of the earth each of
I
us
want
would get.
Jerusalem.
I don't think anyone really spoke for that, to be honest.
Nobody else wanted it. You can have
Infidels.
it. Good job, Emma.
Infidels. Absolute infidels.
We need risk.
It was all
with
Christian
that
class.
area, right?
Oh.
We need a smaller risk map with like just the Middle East. That would be fun.
You do need like a pop. Well, we actually needed a pop out map of Italy because everyone wanted a piece of like Roman history. So
Yeah, well, and it was city-states battling up until Napoleon. Before that, it wasn't even a country, so
yeah,
not that long ago.
it's an entertaining thing to do. Sometimes.
No, I was watching a video. This guy, what's his name? Jeremy Fielding, I think. He's got an interesting YouTube channel. He does engineering stuff, and I don't watch all his stuff or anything crazy, but he had this thing like how I built the Doctor Who desk. It was like, ooh, Doctor Who, right? Like, ooh, Doctor Who. Yeah, Doctor
Yeah,
Who is
oh.
good. I've got my little K9. So, it had it was for somebody in a wheelchair, basically. So he builds this custom desk that's held up by Daleks. And I was like, there we go.
That's amazing. Actually, at church today, someone had a "Don't Blink" license plate holder on their car.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the newer one, the statues. Yeah. But I found it fascinating. But it was very.
What is it?
It's an interesting. It was an interesting desk because it had like lighting up above because it's got this shroud above it, and I was just like, man, this is so liturgical. Like this is like, oh yeah, you can just see and the reverence that everybody had for it, not just as a gift, but the whole ethos around it. It was sponsored by Dassault Systems, who makes the CAD system that he used, and all this, and it was a contest by them to give back to the community, which is awesome and wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just the whole thing with the unboxing, and I'm just like, man, this is so church-like. It's very funny.
I mean, I think unboxings are very much a ritual. They turn up all across YouTube. So while we're asking about background things, what's the dragon, Mark?
So you don't watch my channel, then you'd know the end. That dragon, I got that at a festival called La Kermesse, which is the frog, because the French Canadian hate the French, so they're just like they do things like, well, we're frogs, we don't care. It's like just a poke at the French. I swear they modified the language just annoyingly enough to piss off. So they I think it's still going, the La Kermesse Festival in Biddeford, Maine. But I got that when I was like 17. I've had it in a box ever since then. Like I don't even know how the hell I kept it. There's a bunch of stuff I lost, but I kept that, and it was in my shed. And I was finally like, oh, I gotta check out some of the stuff and put it on the walls. And I haven't done much of that. Like that's about the only thing I put up. So yeah, that's where it's from. It's just a random dragon I won at a carnival show, basically.
That's cool. It's nice to look at.
Thank you. I like it. It was funny when I had the whiteboard up first, and then when I went to put that up, Sally Joe was like, well, it's got to be centered on the door. And I'm like, hold on, I know what I'm doing. I'm stupid, but I'm not slow. And I put it in just the right place. And she was like, oh no, that is right. And I'm like, I'm a little dumb, but I'm not that dumb. I can do a couple things correctly. So that worked out okay.
Yeah, maybe I put up this picture behind me. I guess no, my mother-in-law definitely put up that whiteboard. She put up most of the stuff around here just one day while I was at school, because I hadn't gotten around to it.
Well, that's nice.
I mean,
It was
is
very
there-
nice of her. I was very appreciative. The whiteboard,
Really?
actually, my
Were you?
friend did. Can you see the 2019-2020? I haven't
Hold on.
erased it.
Like, my mother-in-law is judging me. My mother-in-law is no.
My mother-in-law is lovely, and I have very few quibbles with her.
Mm.
And the main one is just if she wants to ask me a question, she needs to phrase it as a question because I am stupid. And if she phrases it as a, like, maybe this can happen, I'm not going to get that she's asking me if this can happen.
Yeah. Some people are too subtle, and yeah.
Yeah. But
Modes
she
of
is
engagement.
lovely, and she did a good job hanging pictures all over my apartment. And I was mildly frustrated at the time because I do like things to be mentioned to me before they happen at my apartment. But
See,
I mean,
that's
to be
what
fair,
I
it's also
thought. That is what I thought.
There's always conflict. You just have to accept a certain amount of it. And when you don't do that, you run into this
I
crisis problem.
just know women are very, very particular about their pictures. So like,
It can
if
be.
she
it
put up,
wasn't.
They're
if she-
particular about the home, the inside space, because that's what they care for.
Yeah.
So if it's dirty, they get upset. If it's moved around, maybe they like it, maybe they don't. Like, they want, that's their space to control. That's why.
Well, I get
Exactly.
upset about like things happening without my knowledge.
in your home, where
In
you
my
are
home.
queen of your castle.
But I mean, if you ask my husband, I leave way too much stuff everywhere. So
Oh, interesting. That's fascinating.
not to that extent. I exaggerate when I talk. I just I'm somewhat messier than he is.
Have I?
Um,
You're messier than your husband. How is that
I
possible?
am messier than
Is it,
we're this weird backwards thing that's never going to make sense to people.
is it
so.
messy or just less organized? Because those are two different things.
Mostly I'm bad at putting my clothes actually in the hamper.
That's interesting. That is,
That
that's
is-
backwards.
that-
You're backwards. We can confirm, Emma, you are backwards. Thank you.
Yep.
So
Yeah,
so-
I'm getting a PhD in classics and he's getting a counseling degree.
Yep, that's backwards. Yep, backwardsness confirmed again. Thank you.
I have to
Something went
find-
wrong with the bell curves here. They just ended up flipped. But at least we found each other, I guess.
Yeah. Well done. Lucky you.
I have to find. This is one of my favorite Babylon Bee articles.
Oh no.
Oh no.
Why? Oh no!
I
This is
feel
a
like I
great
know. Yeah.
You knew this. Which one it would be?
491st.
I had like a short list that I was kind of running through.
Local woman Christy Larson is a careful student of God's word. She especially likes Jesus' emphasis on forgiveness, such as when the Messiah instructed Peter to forgive people 70 times 7 times. Since reading the passage, Larson has kept a tally of how many times her husband David has left his socks on the floor instead of walking them the 5 feet to the hamper. Let's see. I've got to forgive you 70 times 7 times. Carry the one. Hey, honey, you're dead meat, she cried as she realized he had exceeded the forgiveness limit. I am now allowed to hold this against you for the rest of our lives. Ha! I love this article. It's one of my
That's good. That's good. I like it.
That is a good one. Babylon Bee, especially like it's gotten less funny in the past couple years, in my opinion. Or maybe just the good ones don't turn up. on my feed anymore. But like when I was in college, Babylon Bee was the best.
They also, I mean, I think they put out a lot more articles and they're a lot better known. And like, I think the amount, I think I used to see fewer Babylon Bee articles, and that's made me think that the quality is less.
That's very possible.
You've seen the Calvinist dog
Everything
one?
is better before you follow it on Facebook is the upshot.
Yeah.
Once you follow it on Facebook, it gets worse. And really that's because you see everything it puts out, not just the things your friends think are funny. But
You're using a filter.
according to perception, it's like as soon as I follow something, it just goes downhill. I am the shark that everything jumps.
This is one of their number one T-shirts. Calvinist dog corrects owner. No one is a good boy.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Or Calvin Firm.
That is one of their classics. I love that one.
Yeah. No one is
Yeah.
a good boy.
I was in college before I learned Calvinists are still a thing.
I should be making a video about Calvin, but I don't want to.
It's a big deal. Like Calvinism has not gone away at all. It's
I
more prevalent
realize that now
than-
after meeting several Presbyterians at Hillsdale.
Matthew got very, very upset at me for not engaging his Calvinism on Friday.
Oh. I didn't watch that stream. Because it
How
was
many
Friday, I was
times-
visiting my college friends.
How many times do I have to address the same thing over and over again?
a billion.
Every time someone wants to talk to you about it. Obviously.
Obviously.
But to find new ways to reach them. That's it. You know, and it might not be possible.
No,
but
it's
you
because
gotta
they're
keep
pretty
trying.
sure they can find new ways to reach you.
Mm,
Right,
That's my
right.
guess.
That's the issue. You'll soon see
I-
Calvin is right.
Yeah. I actually got pretty frustrated last Sunday, but I don't know. I feel like, and I felt this way at Hillsdale too, because Hillsdale has to replay the Protestant Reformation every lunch period. I feel like at least 90% of theological arguments are a waste of time.
Yes, I agree.
this is
Because-
probably true.
Like, especially when it's someone as well known as like you. Like, what do people think they have that you haven't heard? I'm sorry. Maybe you do have something, but I feel like most people will not have something that Jacob has not heard.
Hold on.
Like
Why
that
do you
piece.
think I'm well known?
Well, people should
Probably-
realize.
I mean around this corner. I don't mean
Yeah, but-
like
People
in
should
general.
realize at some point, like maybe, right? Because I tell people that all the time. I'm like, you don't understand. You think this is the first time this argument's been made, but I've had this argument literally 1,000 times, and you know, you don't realize that because you haven't interfaced with it. And yeah, people don't. They really get stuck in their own head to the point where, you know, I mean, it's the whole thing about real communism has never been tried, and then, you know, my new retort to that is neither is real capitalism. It's all good. Like, what do you, it's fine.
you know, yeah, I've heard that argument too.
But
The-
that's
the
the
real
thing.
capitalism has never
It's
been tried.
unknown unknowns. Like they have no idea what they don't know, and then they come in and they're like, "No, I'm sure you've never heard this," and it's like, "Oh no, thousands of times, you hear it all the time."
Like in our randos conversation, Paul Vanderclay, Pastor Paul, there we go, asked me if I thought he should be Catholic, and then told me to tell him why.
Wow.
And I was like, I don't have anything interesting to add to this conversation though.
Good for
Why
you.
are you making, like, I can give you the catechism explanation of why everybody should be Catholic.
It's
I'm
beyond
betting
that.
someone said it before.
It's so beyond that. You have to understand. Paul is too Catholic to become Catholic.
I don't know about that.
Paul, no, I will explain to you why Paul is too Catholic
Please
to become Catholic. His grandfather was a CRC minister. His father was a CRC minister. He was born into the CRC, and being the cradle Catholic that he is, he will not leave his church no matter
He won't
what.
leave his tradition.
Yeah, but that's a feature of all Protestants. They all resort to the most Protestant thing I could do would be to leave my personal church. And it's like, that's not how that works.
Well, yeah, it is the most Protestant thing, but they won't.
Well, it's not. No, because Protestantism isn't about rejecting what you're doing now. It's about rejecting the correct answer.
Well, I agree with you.
Well, then. I'm not going to argue, but Elijah's going to yell at me for being a trad calf again.
Are you a trad calf? Why are you such a trad calf?
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm a trad calf. I really don't.
No.
I'm a woman getting a PhD, so I'm probably not. I'm probably
definitely not. You're way too.
So are you actually in a PhD program, or are you just in?
I am. Yeah.
Oh.
I finished the master's part.
Congrats. Well done.
How many decades do you intend to be the ABD?
Depends how many babies I have.
The fact that Yosef is still ABD makes me want to wring his neck every time I talk to him, because he was supposed all but dissertation.
Ah, okay.
His dissertation was supposed to be done last May.
How many years has he been ABD?
Just 13 months.
Oh, okay. That could be a lot worse.
Yes, there are people who are ABD for a very long time.
Yeah. Actually, I guess the school my mom works at just got a new teacher who was ABD for like 5 years or something, and then finally just quit.
Yeah. That
was like, this isn't happening. And in the meantime, she did actually have like 4 kids. So
you know what? 4 kids are worth more than 4 dissertations, in my opinion.
In my opinion as well. Although, for the record, I do not intend to stay ABD for like forever. Or even, I do intend to get out of, like, get done and figure something else out as soon as possible.
Nobody expects ABD
forever. But there are worse things to be stuck in, I suppose. Probably. We'll see how the next couple of years go. Classics is a rough discipline.
That's true. Yeah, there are worse things to be like sleep deprived. So I got to work in the morning. So I will talk to you all later.
Talk to you later. Oh, yeah, you're East Coast as well.
Always a pleasure. Yeah, I'm East Coast. It's almost midnight. I actually have to go somewhere and do something, which is unusual. But, you know, sometimes you actually have to do things in the world. So have a lovely night, everybody. Great to see you.
Good talking to you.
Good night. I should probably go to sleep too.
Yeah, me too. This was fun, though.
But there are 10 people watching.
And they can find something else to watch.
They could. Okay, I am going to put the link in the chat, and if people want to come on, they can. And if people don't want to come on, then I can go to bed. And you're not on the East Coast, you're Midwest, right?
That's correct. I'm Central Time Zone. So it's only almost 11 here. But I will probably still, like, if no one else gets on, I will still probably just leave.
Yeah, it's only 9 p.m. here, but I should get some sleep and do work and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just letting myself down off of the travel weekend high slowly by jumping on here.
Mm. Okay, you know what? I am going to land this plane. Good night, people.
Good night.